Well, this makes it clear, doesn't it? The entire inheritance goes to your brother. The will is genuine, so stop your doubting. What? Is it really okay for us to take all this money? My husband, looking down on me, and the elated sister-in-law. The $100 million inheritance from father will be inherited entirely by my brother. I stare at the will stating this with a sense of utter despair. Have I lost everything and am stuck with this despicable man for the rest of my life? But with one sentence from my brother, everything turns upside down. My name is Catherine. I'm a 55-year-old housewife. I have no children with my husband, Robert, and we live as a couple. Robert is, in a word, a typical chauvinist. Since the beginning of our marriage, Robert's commands were absolute, and I could neither defy him nor express my opinion. My husband, 10 years older than me, has no consideration for me at all. I serve Robert like a slave, desperately doing household chores, and if there's something he doesn't like, he doesn't hesitate to verbally abuse me. Being unable to have children was also blamed on me, and I cried in secret almost every day. I wanted to divorce, but I didn't want to worry my relatives, and I didn't have the financial strength to become independent. I've been enduring and staying strong under my arrogant husband, who has a knack for psychological abuse. My only emotional support was my father. My father was once a capable businessman. He built a company from scratch and developed it into a major corporation. Although he was a workaholic, he loved my brother and me in his own way. Shortly after I got married, my mother passed away in a car accident, and my father immersed himself more in work as if to distract himself from the loneliness. It seems the overwork took its toll. My father had a stroke and was taken to the hospital. Fortunately, his life was not in danger, but he was left paralyzed on the left side. The price for working so recklessly was a massive inheritance. I persuaded my father to retire. I was worried about my father living alone, so I managed to persuade my husband, and we moved into my father's house. Once a workaholic, my father seemed to age rapidly upon retirement, showing signs of dementia, and in no time, he was bedridden and in need of nursing care. My physical and mental burdens increased dramatically. In addition to everyday housekeeping and taking care of Robert, I now had to take care of my father with dementia. Sometimes my father would lay quietly, but other times he would shout and thrash around in the middle of the night, or he would wander out of the house. I was constantly exhausted due to lack of sleep, stress, and endless hard work. Although my father was often dazed, there were times when he was clear-minded. At such times, we could have a peaceful conversation like the old times. My father often thanked me and smiled sadly, saying, "I want to leave you with as much as I can." My father passed away. This happened 3 years after I started taking care of him. Although I was relieved from the burden of care, the loss of my father, my only emotional support, left me with an enormous sense of loss and loneliness. My only hope was my father's inheritance. An inheritance of $100 million, even if split in half with my brother, would be $50 million. With that amount of money, I could finally break free from my devil-like husband. It was my only remaining hope in life. Then, a few days later, I was called by Robert and our eldest son's wife, Naomi, to discuss the inheritance. Naomi's husband, that is, my brother, has been working overseas for several years. He had returned home for the funeral but had just returned to his assignment yesterday. In place of my brother, his wife Naomi would also be present. "Your dad's will was found in the back of the drawer. It's good that it was ready for us and it wasn't sealed, so let's take a look right away." A will? I didn't know there was such a thing. I was providing care every day, but I never saw him writing a will. I wondered why my husband, who hardly cared for my father, knew about it. I had an uneasy feeling and a bad premonition. "Let's read it. All of my assets will be inherited by my eldest son, Ken. Dated April 1st, John Smith." That's it. I couldn't believe my ears. I had always thought that my father's estate would be equally divided between my brother and me. I couldn't believe that all of my father's $100 million estate would be inherited only by my brother. Whoa, wait a minute. That's strange. Why would that be? My husband handed me the will and told me to see for myself as I panicked. Indeed, it was written on the will, along with my father's signature. I immediately suspected that the will was forged. My father had a good relationship with both my brother and me, and he wasn't the type to favor only one of us. But would my kind and straightforward brother really hoard the inheritance all to himself? As I was deep in thought, my brother's wife burst into laughter. Wow! We get to keep all of his money? That feels kind of wrong. But if that's his wish, we have to respect it, right? I absolutely couldn't accept this. As I silently held the will, both my husband and my brother's wife glared at me. Hey, are you doubting this? If so, you can bring in a handwriting expert or something. Just because it's inconvenient for you doesn't mean you can go doubting it. You really have a bad attitude. I'll do that, I murmured, deciding to get the will appraised. However, contrary to my expectations, the results were that it was unquestionably written by the testator himself. I was disappointed at the shocking results and fell into despair, thinking about the past. I had devoted my life to taking care of my husband and my father. Living in fear of my husband's anger, being hurt by his verbal abuse, and being called a worthless woman was painful, but my last days with my father were happy. Even though I believed that my father cared for me too. It was more shocking and unbearable for me to think that my beloved father didn't care about me than not receiving the inheritance. I probably have to leave this familiar house and land, because they are part of my father's real estate inheritance. My dream of divorcing my husband is also now back to square one. When I told my husband about the appraisal result of the will at home over the weekend, he sneered at me with a self-righteous face. That settles it, all the inheritance goes to your brother. Don't go meddling in things anymore. The will was real. Always doubting, you worthless wife. He left the house after throwing those words. Speaking of which, my husband has been away from home a lot lately. He's been coming home from work very late, and he's often not home on weekends like this. I found it suspicious, but I didn't want to see my husband as much as possible, so I was actually relieved. Despite my husband's objections, I wanted to talk to my brother directly about the inheritance. My brother, who worked overseas, was always busy, but he was a kind and reliable person. I made sure in advance that my brother wasn't too busy, and then I gave him a call. After some brief greetings, my brother again apologized for leaving the care of our father entirely to me and thanked me for handling the funeral and various procedures. Don't worry about it. By the way, Robert, about Dad's inheritance. Was it always decided that you would be the sole heir? I tried to ask casually. It was unbearable to think that maybe I wasn't loved by my father, but I wanted to talk about it properly. Huh? What do you mean? All of the inheritance goes to me? My brother sounded surprised. I thought Naomi had told him, but it seems he was hearing about it for the first time. But the will was genuine, so the result wouldn't change. I told my brother about what happened. I see. The handwriting on the will is Dad's and that was all it said, huh? Understood, I'll need some time to think. I'll get back to you. I'll tell Naomi not to proceed with anything until she hears from me. My brother said, ending the call. Intrigued yet patient, I waited for my brother's call. Days later, my brother contacted me. My brother had requested that I look into Naomi's suspicious activities by hiring a private investigator. He also advised me to claim my legitimate share from him. The legitimate share refers to the minimum portion of an inheritance that is guaranteed to an inheritor, and the amount varies based on your position in the family. In my case, I can claim from my father's $25 million inheritance. Even with his will stating, all the inheritance should go to my brother, this legal provision would still allow me to inherit the $25 million. However, this did not sit well with my husband and my brother's wife. The decision has already been made. Don't mess it up now, they protested. However, there was more to my brother's advice. I'm not asking for the $25 million. All I want is this house, filled with memories of our father, and the land. The total estate is worth $100 million, but the real estate property is only worth $10 million. I'll cede all the rest of the inheritance to my brother. Still, the two of them continued to argue, so I continued. If this continues to escalate, I have been instructed by my brother to hire a lawyer to join the discussion. If it comes to that, I'm sure I'll inherit $25 million exactly. My husband and Naomi fell silent. Eventually, it seemed the two decided it was more profitable to settle for the $10 million worth of real estate. We finally agreed on the division of the inheritance. A few days later, I received the results of an investigation I had requested from a private investigator about Naomi. I immediately contacted my brother. After many twists and turns, the process of inheriting our father's estate was successfully completed. During the process, my brother Ken, from abroad, rushed to help. I inherited the family home and land, which was worth $10 million. My brother inherited the rest of the estate, which amounted to $90 million. Naomi and my husband were both in a good mood, with things progressing as they had hoped. After completing the inheritance proceedings, the four of us left the law office and returned to our father's house. While having a cup of tea in the living room, my brother began to speak, placing his smartphone on the table. Well done, everyone. Now that we've successfully inherited Dad's estate, there's something I want to talk about, he said with a smile. With that, he pulled a document from his pocket and spread it out on the table. The faces of my husband and Naomi turned pale upon reading the content. "It's a will" was the title written on the document. At the end of it was my father's signature and stamp. The date was about 5 years ago. This is a will that Dad entrusted to me when he was still working. It was created with 2 witnesses at a notary office. It's a legally valid will, my brother informed us. According to him, our father had drafted it before he had a stroke. His wife had already passed away, and in the event that something happened to him, he wanted to ensure his children would be properly provided for. The content of the will indicated that 1/4 of the total estate was to be left to Ken, who already had significant wealth, and 3/4 to Catherine, housewife. My father had made clear his intention not to change this will, and had explicitly stated in the will. If there's any change to this will, the reason for the change must be stated. Any will that does not include a reason for change is considered null and void. My father was really pushing himself at work. I think he was considering all sorts of things, like what would happen if he fell gravely ill or became senile. The estate was enormous, so he prepared early to prevent any conflicts among the remaining family members. My brother said, caressing the will. The will contained an addendum, stating, "I hope that there will be no conflicts over the inheritance and that the family will continue to live happily together." It was a will filled with my father's warm wishes for his family. I was touched to know that I was loved by my father just as much as my brother, and my heart swelled. On the other hand, my husband and Naomi next to me turned pale. "So, if you're going to change this will, the reason has to be stated, or else it's all null and void. Even if it's in my dad's handwriting. Maybe he was forced to write it when he was in a delirious state due to dementia." Suddenly, my husband slammed the table. With a ferocious expression, he glared at my brother and growled. "Hey, Ken, do you have any proof? Calling me a criminal. I never said you forged the will, did I, Robert?" He then looked at his wife, Naomi, sitting next to him. Naomi remained silent. I found it strange. Naomi informed me that my father had passed away and I was in the States for the funeral. After I returned abroad, apparently the topic of inheritance came up. But even though it concerned me, I wasn't informed of anything about it, my brother mentioned. He was looking at his wife, Naomi. Naomi still said nothing. "Quit your yapping. The inheritance is all settled, the $90 million is ours. It doesn't matter what you say now. What do you mean by ours? The one who inherited is me, my brother countered calmly. Shut up, my husband shouted back. The conversation was getting nowhere. I'm not sure what you mean, but the $90 million I inherited are just worthless paper, my brother said calmly. What? My husband retorted, surprised. My brother explained patiently. Our father's estate was worth $100 million. All of the assets, apart from real estate, were stocks in our father's own company. Back when my father was running the company, everything was smooth sailing and the stocks were soaring. But after he stepped down, the company continued to run in the red, and it seemed to be on the verge of bankruptcy in the 3 years before he passed away. The stocks that once had a value exceeding $90 million was now virtually worthless pieces of paper. But that can't be possible, can it? It's the truth. I inherited knowing that. I plan on restructuring my father's company, and since it had nothing to do with you, I didn't bother telling you. My husband seems rattled and mumbles to himself. He can't seem to come to terms with reality. It was then that Naomi spoke up for the first time. Hang on, just wait a minute. What do you mean by that? So you're saying I unknowingly inherited trash, while Catherine alone inherited $10 million? That's not fair. That's unfair. Beside the screaming Naomi, my brother sighed. Naomi. I inherited my father's estate. You weren't disadvantaged in any way. Is there any reason for you to be this angry? But, I thought we were going to get all of that $100 million. I planned for so many things. Robert, my husband, glared sharply at the flustered Naomi. So you conspired with Robert, thinking you were going to get all of my father's money. And while you were at it, you were having an affair, weren't you? Naomi and her husband fell silent as if frozen in place. Why? Naomi muttered in a raspy voice. Glancing at her, my brother continued. After our phone call, my brother started to suspect Naomi. Why didn't she talk to me about the inheritance? Why had her interactions with me been so curt lately, and why had she started ignoring my calls? I had my suspicions, and after seeing her post on social media, I was certain she was having an affair. Pretty soon, I'm going to come into a lot of money. I'll be living the life of a celebrity. I've been talking it over with my babe about how to spend it. He told me we're going to have so much fun once the money comes in. I'm so happy. I don't remember having that conversation with you, Naomi. I wonder who this babe of yours might be. No. You've got it all wrong. This isn't. Ignoring his flustered wife, my brother pulled out a large envelope. He took out several photos from the envelope and lined them up next to the will. They were pictures of Naomi and Robert going into a hotel with their arms entwined. The close relationship between the two was clear. I've been abroad, you know. I hired a private detective to investigate because I was curious about your babe. Presented with undeniable evidence, Naomi started to shake. Looking at Naomi's affair partner, my husband, I saw that he was boiling red with anger, a stark contrast to the pale Naomi. Damn you, snooping around like a stalker. What the hell is all this? With your ridiculous will and these photos. What a joke. Stop! Suddenly, Naomi raised her voice. She approached my brother in a seductive voice, like a bad actress. Hey, you're wrong, it's all a misunderstanding. It's all Robert's doing. He convinced me that if I listened to him, I'd get all of your dad's inheritance. Hey, wouldn't you be happy to receive $100 million? I thought it was for your benefit. My husband, who had been easily betrayed, stared at Naomi with his mouth wide open. This picture, we were just messing around. You were always overseas, and I was lonely. You're also to blame, aren't you? Hey, forgive me. The $90 million is no good anymore, but let's take the $10 million from Catherine's real estate. Did you forge the will? Huh? Of course not. Robert did it. He said it was easy and had it written by your father. See, I'm not at fault. When the matter of the forged will was revealed, My husband flew into a rage and lunged at Naomi, but my brother quickly intervened. "You bastards! You don't have any evidence. You all will regret this in hell." As he ranted and kicked a chair, my brother coolly watched and slowly took out his phone. "Oh, it seems my phone was on record mode. It's been recording everything since we came home. That was a careless mistake." The husband and Naomi turned pale and fell silent. "Also, I didn't mention it, but this room has surveillance cameras that record everything. I installed them because of Dad's severe dementia, just in case something happened to him." What a coincidence. In the silent living room, only my brother kept talking. "Falsifying a will is a crime. Your earlier outburst at us could be considered a threat, punishable by law. There's a police station nearby, and they would be here quickly if we report it. But then again, since the inheritance issue has been settled and if you swear not to touch Catherine's stuff in the future, maybe there's no need to report. What do you think?" As he said this, my brother started operating his phone. I might as well send this voice recording to my computer overseas. Having been silently observing the exchange until now, I pulled out a document from my bag and thrust it at my husband. "Robert, I want a divorce." Whoa, hold on, reconsider this. "I'm sorry. We've been together for years, haven't we? Who do you think has been providing for you all this time? I've had enough. Stop with the excuses and just agree to the divorce. If not, I'm calling the police." I clenched my smartphone with a look of grim determination. Robert drooped his shoulders and nodded. "Naomi, our relationship is over. Once I received the money, you were planning to take it and be with Ken, weren't you? I heard the records of your exchanges with Ken from a private investigator." Naomi hung her head, covering her face with her hands. "Afterwards, both my brother and I got divorced. Following the divorce, Robert left the house. The inheritance that he thought he'd acquired was not only worthless, but Naomi also spilled the beans about the forgery of the will. Everything that happened in the living room was also fully recorded. Robert must have been livid, but there was nothing he could do about it. The surveillance camera in the living room was originally installed for my father's care, but it also served the purpose of collecting evidence of Robert's emotional abuse. Even if I acquired my father's inheritance, I was planning to submit it as evidence in a divorce trial if Robert refused to divorce. When I told my brother about this, he suggested we use that camera as well. After the divorce, Robert lost his job due to rumors of his affair spreading in the workplace. It seems his colleagues had spotted him going in and out of hotels with a woman who was not his wife. Robert's parents had already passed away, and with the loss of his job and home, he disappeared. I had been requesting a share of his assets, but I didn't want to be involved with Robert anymore, especially after having inherited some wealth. Naomi, the woman Robert cheated with, also lost everything just like him. She had been insisting, "I don't want to break up. Don't leave me," during the divorce proceedings with my brother Ken, but the divorce was finalized when solid evidence was presented at the mediation. Naomi had been splurging money while Robert was not around, and she was billed for all of it, leaving her penniless. Since she had not been working from the start, and like Robert, didn't have a home to return to, she's now scraping by in a dilapidated public housing project, living off welfare. My brother Ken is still working overseas, but he has put up the house where he lived with Naomi for sale, and he will be moving in with me in the house that our father left us. I've always lived frugally, but my life has become stable since my brother started contributing to the living expenses. The value of the land my father left me has been increasing year by year, and now it's easily worth over $100 million. I've been freed from caring for my dad and from the emotional abuse from my husband, and now I'm living a relaxed life. With time to myself and now living alone in a large house, I started to think about how I could utilize it. Around that time, I saw a TV program about foreign exchange students doing homestays, and I thought, that's it. I decided to start a room rental service in my spare rooms. I'm offering rooms at a low cost to college students and exchange students, and now I live a lively life with them. We all eat meals together, play games, and help each other with assignments. We live together happily, almost like a family. On other days when I have some free time, I also do activities like reading storybooks at the local public library. I don't have any children of my own, and my husband and I had grown apart. After losing my beloved father, I was always worried about how lonely I would be, but now my days are unbelievably lively and vibrant. Even at my age, it's so rewarding to connect with young people and make even a small contribution to society. There have been many things in my life that were so hard, I wanted to run away. But now, I'm loosely connected with my brother, my roommates, and people in my community, and I'm living fulfilling days. Every day, I savor the modest happiness I've finally achieved.
"Since we'll be leaving this place today, could you please move out?" she asked. "We'll also pay the $473 monthly loan now that my daughter is coming. We no longer need you." "Okay, well then, please take care of everything from now on," she said, her voice tight. Even though we had supported our in-laws so much, they easily shifted their trust to the younger sister. As I reached the entrance, packing my belongings, I told them something significant. "Oh, by the way, it seems there's a misunderstanding. The monthly loan repayment is..." Their faces turned pale, shock etched on their features. "My name is Emily, a 35-year-old office worker. I've been married to Tom for 3 years. We met through a mutual friend who believed we'd be perfect for each other. This friend's intuition was spot on. We were drawn to each other from our first conversation. Tom also felt the same, and we began dating. We continued the relationship smoothly, and around 2 years later he proposed to me. I was so happy, as I loved him deeply. Both our families agreed to our marriage, and we had a wonderful wedding attended by many. We then went on a honeymoon and began our life together as a married couple. We both worked, so we shared household chores. Tom had lived alone for a long time and could cook, which was a huge help. Even when I was late for work, Tom helped me and started cooking so we could have dinner soon after. We cooperated in all household tasks, and life felt peaceful and stress-free. We were grateful for each other's company. In the blink of an eye, 3 years passed, and our bond remained as strong as when we were newlyweds. However, a significant event occurred. Tom's father fell ill suddenly, and we rushed to the hospital. "Dad, are you okay?" Tom asked anxiously. Tom, Emily, thank you for coming," his father said, his voice weak. "Sorry for causing you concern. It seems I overexerted myself." He had been a workaholic, often working long hours, and as he aged, the stress of those years took a toll on him. "For now, I'll undergo some tests and wait for the results," he said. Tom and I were anxious, but more than that, my mother-in-law was quite upset. For the mother-in-law who had always supported her husband as a housewife, it was understandable that she was upset when her partner, the mainstay of the family, was suddenly in mortal danger. "Mother-in-law, are you all right?" I asked, concerned. "Yes, somehow," she replied, her voice trembling. We cared deeply for both of them and began visiting them more frequently, trying to be as supportive as possible. After a week, the father-in-law's test results came out. Although he was released from the hospital, there were concerns about a recurrence. Realizing that they might not handle another emergency, Tom proposed something. "Hey, what if we live together with my parents?" he suggested. The proposal was expected. If my parents were in the same situation, I'd want to live with them too. "Of course, I'm okay with that. Let's discuss it with them right away," I said. "Thank you, Emily," Tom replied, his eyes filled with gratitude. We quickly presented the idea to our in-laws. "Live together? My mother-in-law's voice cracked, tears welling up in her eyes. We want to be a burden. Not a bother at all, I reassured her. Emily and I are worried about both of you. Thank you, both of you, our in-laws said tearfully, their voices choked with emotion. They must have been quite anxious. They gratefully accepted our proposal. We promptly moved in with them. Knowing that both of us worked, my mother-in-law took the lead in the household chores. Thanks to her, we could focus on our jobs. The father-in-law retired early and spent his days resting at home, which improved his health. We all got along wonderfully without any issues, and life was joyous. However, our in-laws made a certain proposal. I've been thinking about this for a while, the father-in-law said, his voice thoughtful. How would you feel about building a new two-family house? It's a bit small for 4 adults to live in this house, he continued. And if Tom and Emily have children in the future, it'll be even smaller. Considering the future, I've been thinking of building a bigger house where we can live comfortably for the rest of our lives. However, it's not something we can afford with just my savings. We will need to discuss and decide together. The proposal surprised Tom and I, but we thought it wasn't a bad idea. While the current in-laws' house isn't too small, it's neither spacious nor comfortable. Leaving here long-term might lead to stress building up between us. Perhaps buying a new home where everyone can live comfortably is a good idea. After discussing with Tom for a while, we decided to go along with the father-in-law's proposal. Subsequently, the 4 of us went to real estate agencies to look at various properties. We considered making it barrier-free for our in-laws and ensuring there are plenty of rooms if children come along. Ideally, it should be a safe area, close to both a hospital and a train station, and have easy access to grocery stores. Given everyone's requirements, it seemed like it might be pricey. However, if we're going to live here for the rest of our lives, we don't want to compromise too much. Each family member shared the same sentiment, so fueled by determination, we decided to build our dream house, no matter the cost. After some time, our new home was finally completed. The exterior and interior were both new and beautiful, and just gazing upon it filled our hearts with joy. This is amazing, my mother-in-law said, her eyes shining with delight. I can't be sick anymore. I want to stay healthy and live here for as long as possible. The in-laws seemed pleased, and my husband and I were equally excited. This is the house that will be with us for our entire lives, I exclaimed, my voice filled with excitement. When we have kids, I want to play catch in the garden and have barbecues. That sounds great, my husband added, his smile mirroring mine. Let's make lots of family memories here. We were overflowing with excitement and joy. Living in the house turned out to be truly comfortable, and it felt like the pinnacle of happiness. Being in a comfortable home made me even more enthusiastic about my work. Subsequently, my work went very smoothly. Both my public and private lives were fulfilling, and I genuinely felt grateful for buying this house. The months passed in the blink of an eye, and 2 years had passed in this house. We continued to have a good relationship with our in-laws as always, and we believed that the days ahead would be filled with happiness. However, at least this place for life in our new home, something unexpected happened. It was when my sister-in-law and her husband visited our new house. While this is a nice house, it's not fair that only you guys get to live here, she said, her voice laced with resentment. What are you talking about? We discussed and decided to buy this house with our parents, I replied, my voice calm but firm. But I can't help but feel envious, she continued, her tone bitter. When we were still living in a cheap apartment, it felt like you were living beyond your means. My sister-in-law often visited our house during holidays and always expressed her envy. Every time, she would accuse us of being unfair. We've been paying the mortgage for this house, and it's quite a hefty amount every month. We're living within our means, earning enough to pay for this house, so there's no reason for her to complain. If we were to live here with the in-laws, it would be so much fun, don't you think? What can you even know about the market for this house? Since we'll be leaving this place today, could you please move out? She asked. We'll also pay the $473 monthly loan now that my daughter is coming. We no longer need you. Okay, well then, please take care of everything from now on, she said, her voice tight. Even though we had supported our in-laws so much, they easily shifted their trust to the younger sister. As I reached the entrance, packing my belongings, I told them something significant. Oh, by the way, it seems there's a misunderstanding. The monthly loan repayment is. Their faces turned pale, shock etched on their features. My name is Emily, a 35-year-old office worker. I've been married to Tom for 3 years. We met through a mutual friend who believed we'd be perfect for each other. This friend's intuition was spot on. We were drawn to each other from our first conversation. Tom also felt the same, and we began dating. We continued the relationship smoothly, and around 2 years later he proposed to me. I was so happy, as I loved him deeply. Both our families agreed to our marriage, and we had a wonderful wedding attended by many. We then went on a honeymoon and began our life together as a married couple. We both worked, so we shared household chores. Tom had lived alone for a long time and could cook, which was a huge help. Even when I was late for work, Tom helped me and started cooking so we could have dinner soon after. We cooperated in all household tasks, and life felt peaceful and stress-free. We were grateful for each other's company. In the blink of an eye, 3 years passed, and our bond remained as strong as when we were newlyweds. However, a significant event occurred. Tom's father fell ill suddenly, and we rushed to the hospital. "Dad, are you okay?" Tom asked anxiously. Tom, Emily, thank you for coming," his father said, his voice weak. "Sorry for causing you concern. It seems I overexerted myself." He had been a workaholic, often working long hours, and as he aged, the stress of those years took a toll on him. "For now, I'll undergo some tests and wait for the results," he said. Tom and I were anxious, but more than that, my mother-in-law was quite upset. For the mother-in-law who had always supported her husband as a housewife, it was understandable that she was upset when her partner, the mainstay of the family, was suddenly in mortal danger. "Mother-in-law, are you all right?" I asked, concerned. "Yes, somehow," she replied, her voice trembling. We cared deeply for both of them and began visiting them more frequently, trying to be as supportive as possible. After a week, the father-in-law's test results came out. Although he was released from the hospital, there were concerns about a recurrence. Realizing that they might not handle another emergency, Tom proposed something. "Hey, what if we live together with my parents?" he suggested. The proposal was expected. If my parents were in the same situation, I'd want to live with them too. "Of course, I'm okay with that. Let's discuss it with them right away," I said. "Thank you, Emily," Tom replied, his eyes filled with gratitude. We quickly presented the idea to our in-laws. "Live together?" My mother-in-law's voice cracked, tears welling up in her eyes. "We want to be a burden. Not a bother at all," I reassured her. "Emily and I are worried about both of you." "Thank you, both of you," our in-laws said tearfully, their voices choked with emotion. They must have been quite anxious. They gratefully accepted our proposal. We promptly moved in with them. Knowing that both of us worked, my mother-in-law took the lead in the household chores. Thanks to her, we could focus on our jobs. The father-in-law retired early and spent his days resting at home, which improved his health. We all got along wonderfully without any issues, and life was joyous. However, our in-laws made a certain proposal. "I've been thinking about this for a while," the father-in-law said, his voice thoughtful. "How would you feel about building a new 2-family house?" It's a bit small for 4 adults to live in this house," he continued. "And if Tom and Emily have children in the future, it'll be even smaller. Considering the future, I've been thinking of building a bigger house where we can live comfortably for the rest of our lives. However, it's not something we can afford with just my savings. We will need to discuss and decide together." The proposal surprised Tom and I, but we thought it wasn't a bad idea. While the current in-laws' house isn't too small, it's neither spacious nor comfortable. Leaving here long-term might lead to stress building up between us. Perhaps buying a new home where everyone can live comfortably is a good idea. After discussing with Tom for a while, we decided to go along with the father-in-law's proposal. Subsequently, the 4 of us went to real estate agencies to look at various properties. We considered making it barrier-free for our in-laws and ensuring there are plenty of rooms if children come along. Ideally, it should be a safe area, close to both a hospital and a train station, and have easy access to grocery stores. Given everyone's requirements, it seemed like it might be pricey. However, if we're going to live here for the rest of our lives, we don't want to compromise too much. Each family member shared the same sentiment, so fueled by determination, we decided to build our dream house, no matter the cost. After some time, our new home was finally completed. The exterior and interior were both new and beautiful, and just gazing upon it filled our hearts with joy. "This is amazing," my mother-in-law said, her eyes shining with delight. "I can't be sick anymore. I want to stay healthy and live here for as long as possible." The in-laws seemed pleased, and my husband and I were equally excited. "This is the house that will be with us for our entire lives," I exclaimed, my voice filled with excitement. "When we have kids, I want to play catch in the garden and have barbecues." "That sounds great," my husband added, his smile mirroring mine. "Let's make lots of family memories here." We were overflowing with excitement and joy. Living in the house turned out to be truly comfortable, and it felt like the pinnacle of happiness. Being in a comfortable home made me even more enthusiastic about my work. Subsequently, my work went very smoothly. Both my public and private lives were fulfilling, and I genuinely felt grateful for buying this house. The months passed in the blink of an eye, and 2 years had passed in this house. We continued to have a good relationship with our in-laws as always, and we believed that the days ahead would be filled with happiness. However, at least this place for life in our new home, something unexpected happened. It was when my sister-in-law and her husband visited our new house. "While this is a nice house, it's not fair that only you guys get to live here," she said, her voice laced with resentment. "What are you talking about?" "We discussed and decided to buy this house with our parents," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "But I can't help but feel envious," she continued, her tone bitter. "When we were still living in a cheap apartment, it felt like you were living beyond your means." My sister-in-law often visited our house during holidays and always expressed her envy. Every time, she would accuse us of being unfair. "We've been paying the mortgage for this house, and it's quite a hefty amount every month. We're living within our means, earning enough to pay for this house, so there's no reason for her to complain. If we were to live here with the in-laws, it would be so much fun, don't you think? What can you even know about the market for this house?" My husband and I exchanged a glance. The sister-in-law probably just blurted it out without giving it much thought. However, her careless words started to move my in-laws' hearts. "It would be lovely if Kara could move and live here together," the father-in-law said, his voice filled with a newfound desire. "Yes, it would liven things up," the mother-in-law added, her eyes gleaming with agreement. "Hey, what are you two talking about? Haven't we been living together all this while?" I asked, trying to lighten the atmosphere. "Oh, come on, I was just saying," the sister-in-law replied, her tone dismissive. "Exactly, there's no need to panic, right?" my husband added, attempting to diffuse the tension. While the in-laws tried to brush it off, it was evident that they were enticed by the idea of living with their sister-in-law. They seemed to have a particular affection for her. Even Mercer, their pet, went for her. She was a beauty with delicate features, looking like a doll since her childhood. 4 years younger than Tom, she was born when the in-laws were older, making them dote on her even more. This pampering had led her to become quite spoiled, and Tom had to deal with her demanding nature. Having heard all this from Tom, I was always wary of my sister-in-law. For a while, after we got married, Tom and I were both caught off guard because she didn't seem to be causing us any trouble. However, recently, she has been increasingly eyeing our new house. "Oh, Emily, you're back," she said one day, her voice saccharine sweet. "Then I'll be leaving now." "Huh, I wish you'd stay a bit longer," I replied, trying to be polite but hoping she would leave. "But Tom and Emily might find it inconvenient," she said, pretending to be considerate. "I don't think it's a nuisance," I said, trying to hide my irritation. "You might say that, but it's evident in your eyes and behavior," she retorted, her gaze sharp. "Unwanted guests should leave quickly," she said, her voice laced with a veiled threat. "See you, Mom and Dad," she called out as she left. When the sister-in-law left, the in-laws were visibly upset. They looked as if they wished she had stayed longer, even though they didn't voice their feelings. Their faces and attitudes spoke volumes. I often felt out of place, retreating to my room after work to avoid the growing tension that lingered in our home. When Tom came home, we'd cautiously make our way to the living room for dinner, but the atmosphere around the dinner table became increasingly strained. Long silences would hang in the air, and it was clear something was amiss. Tom too sensed the change and began to suspect that the cause of our troubles was his sister. As our relationship with the in-laws deteriorated, the sister-in-law finally made her move. One holiday, Tom and I returned from our morning shopping to find unfamiliar shoes at the entrance. We exchanged glances, perplexed, and then his mother-in-law approached us from the living room. "You're finally back," she said, her tone unusually stern. "We need to talk." As we entered the living room, there sat the sister-in-law and her husband. "Ah, you're finally here," she said, addressing us casually. "Kara, what's going on?" "From today, we'll be living here, so please leave," she declared, catching us off guard. "What?" Tom and I were taken aback by her sudden announcement. What is she thinking, moving in today? "Hold on, it's ridiculous to say that all of a sudden." "It's not sudden," she responded confidently. "We've discussed this with Mom and Dad for a long time. Kai and I will take care of everyone. I'll handle the housework and even care for you when needed. Please rely on us, Mom and Dad. With our daughter here, we don't need you anymore." A daughter-in-law who doesn't do housework or have children is no match for Kara. I was deeply hurt by their words. Seeing my shocked face, the sister-in-law smirked. "We'll pay the $473 monthly loan, okay?" she said as if it would make everything all right. $473? I stammered, unable to believe what I was hearing. Tom and I exchanged dumbfounded glances. It became clear that the in-laws were already planning to kick us out. After such treatment, we couldn't continue living there. "Is that so?" I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. "But we can't move out immediately. Could you give us at least a week? We need to find a new place." "Fine," his mother-in-law said, her tone indifferent. "Ah, you must be looking forward to living with Kara and her husband from today," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. As the in-laws looked disappointed, the sister-in-law and her husband were extremely happy that we decided to leave. "Calm down, Mom and Dad," the sister-in-law chimed in, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "The house isn't going anywhere. I'm looking forward to a week from now." While the in-laws and the sister-in-law's family were thrilled to drive us out, Tom and I seriously reconsidered co-living with such people. We quickly arranged to view rental properties and moved out within a week. On the day we were leaving, I made it clear. "Please take care of everything from now on. Don't ever get involved with us or come to this house again." Their words were harsh, especially considering how much we had supported them. Yet now, we could finally live comfortably with Mom and Dad in our new home. It felt like a dream. As I gathered our belongings and approached the entrance, I shared an important piece of information. "Oh, by the way, it seems there's a misunderstanding about the monthly mortgage payments. It's $1,825 every month, okay? Make sure you understand that." "What?" they exclaimed in shock, their faces turning pale all at once. "Hold on a second, isn't the loan just $473 a month?" they protested. "You misunderstood, didn't you?" I said, my voice firm. "This house is under our father's name, so the loan is contractually agreed to be paid off through a debit from Dad's account. Emily and I were planning to live in this house for the rest of our lives, so we told him he wouldn't have to pay. We were bearing all the costs, so I was transferring $473 and Emily was transferring $1,352 to our father's account every month. It turned out Father had only remembered the monthly transfers into his account. Moreover, Emily and I split the living expenses equally. Our parents probably never thoroughly checked the costs and assumed it wasn't a significant amount." "What? No way!" Tom exclaimed. "We can't pay $1,825 a month. We can't even cover the living expenses on top of that. How can Emily afford to contribute so much? I don't know how you perceive me, but I'm a department head at a major corporation. I earn quite a lot," I interjected, my voice calm but firm. "What?" "Emily earns much more than I do," Tom said, explaining to the in-laws. The in-laws looked shocked. "Well, we've decided to cut ties with you, so it's up to you to support our parents from now on," the father said firmly. "No way, Emily, Tom, wait. We were wrong. Let's live peacefully together like before, okay?" the mother pleaded, her voice laced with desperation. What? Mom and Dad, are you planning to abandon us? You guys can repay the loan, can't you? If that's the case, shouldn't you live with those who can? I argued, my voice rising with anger. That's not fair, the sister-in-law protested, her voice shrill. Dad told me the loan was only about $473. That's why we came here. We've already cancelled our previous house. That's not my problem, Tom said, his voice cold. Isn't this mess because you wanted to move in with us in the first place? Right, your husband earns very little, doesn't he? I added, pointing out their hypocrisy. But you always said family was more important than money and pampered me. When our livelihood is at stake, all of that doesn't matter. The quarrel between the in-laws and the sister-in-law was unbearable to watch. Well, we're leaving, I declared, my voice filled with finality. And with that, Tom and I left the house and moved into our rented room. Despite numerous messages from the in-laws, we ignored them all. According to our neighbors, the in-laws and the sister-in-law's family had no choice but to live together. However, they couldn't pay the loan and eventually had to let go of the house. When they sold the house, a considerable debt remained, even after using the father-in-law's early retirement benefits for repayment. They still fell short. Eventually, they had to settle for a small apartment and work multiple jobs to repay their debt. The sister-in-law's husband didn't want the burden to fall on him, so he ran away. If only the in-laws had continued living peacefully with us, they wouldn't have faced these hardships. But again, it's none of our concern now. On the other hand, Tom and I found our rented apartment much cozier than anticipated. We planned to stay here for a while and save money. We lived happily, watching our savings grow at an incredible rate. We believed it was essential to save as much as we could for the future while enjoying occasional luxuries. Our aim was a happy life together in the years to come. Thanks for watching. How did you find the story? Let me know in the comments below. Remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more awesome stories like this. Your feedback and support mean a lot.
I'm Sophia. I'm 30 years old and I stay at home, taking care of the house. My husband, Stephen, is 6 years older than me, and we've been living with his parents for 2 years. Stephen's parents, Robert and Gianna, are both in their 60s, and they're healthy and full of energy. Gianna, Stephen's mom, really likes going out and having fun. Since I moved in, I've noticed she hardly ever does any chores around the house. Even though she doesn't work outside the home, she doesn't do much inside either. She used to be a stay-at-home mom, but now she leaves most of the housework to me. Sometimes she'll tell me to go have fun while she stays home, but then she'll complain if things aren't done when she comes back. I've been dealing with this situation, trying my best to not get too frustrated. Whenever I try to explain to my mother-in-law that I might not finish everything before she leaves, she brushes it off. She says it's normal to do a lot of chores and criticizes my generation for not being able to handle it, wishing I could be more like her. It's not just the remarks that bother me. Gianna constantly praises Stephen, especially because he works for a big company, which she's proud of. She often says things like, "Oki works so hard, but his wife isn't doing well." It's like her favorite phrase. And Stephen doesn't defend me. During dinner, Gianna starts complaining about me, and Stephen just responds with a simple, "Oh, really?" showing little interest. When I first met Stephen, I thought he was mature because he was older, but things have changed. It feels like he sees me only as a maid. Even when I'm working late into the night, he doesn't say anything to me. Instead, he tosses laundry at me, aiming for my face, and says, "Here, do this too." I regret marrying someone like him. Since we got married, he's changed a lot. On our first anniversary, he bought a cake, but then threw a pie in my face and laughed. You wouldn't think he's a grown man. But there's one bright spot in my life, and that's my father-in-law, Robert. He's calm and always asks if I need help with anything. He's the only one who treats me kindly in this house. Since I quit my job when I got married, he's the only person I can talk to. I've grown to love Robert like a real father. But Robert works during the day, so he's not home much. That means I'm often alone with Gianna. When I talk to Robert, Gianna doesn't say anything, but I can tell she doesn't like it. And her attitude towards me has gotten worse. She started accusing me of making eyes at my father-in-law just because Stephen ignored me. She'd say these things when Robert couldn't hear. I tried to defend myself, saying it wasn't true, but she just brushed it off. Did I touch a nerve? She'd say, acting like I was overreacting. No matter what I said, she always had a snarky comeback. Our talks never really connected. I talked to Stephen about it, hoping he'd understand it was just Gianna's imagination, but he just laughed it off. So now you're into older men too, he joked. It was clear nothing would change. I didn't expect him to help with chores or stop Gianna's teasing, but I never thought he'd say something like that. It was a big shock. I started feeling like I didn't belong in that house. One summer day, Gianna mentioned planning a family trip for Stephen's summer break. At first, I thought it was just her usual desire to go out, but then she surprised me by asking if I wanted to come along. I didn't expect to be invited. I thought they would go without me. When I hesitated, Gianna seemed suspicious and asked if I didn't want to go. I felt uneasy about her sudden invitation. What did she want by including me? I was unsure, but I didn't know how she would react if I said no. That night, Stephen asked me again if I was going on the trip. I replied that I was invited. His response was unexpected. He burst out laughing. "What's so funny?" I asked, feeling uneasy. He just brushed it off, saying it was nothing. On the day of the trip, we set off with Stephen driving. Robert couldn't join us right away due to work, so it was just the three of us in the car, Stephen driving, Gianna in the passenger seat, and me in the back. I couldn't see their faces clearly, which made me even more anxious. Gianna suddenly asked if I had withdrawn some money for the trip. I confirmed that I had taken out a few hundred. She seemed pleased at this, which struck me as odd. After driving for a while, I noticed we had passed the inn we were supposed to stay at. Did we just pass the inn? I asked. Stephen replied vaguely, saying there was a tourist spot ahead, and we'd check in after seeing it. His smile seemed forced, and I sensed something strange was going on. As we drove away from the inn, the scenery outside turned greener. I let out a quiet sigh, making sure neither Gianna nor Stephen heard me. Eventually, we arrived at a dam. It wasn't very big, and there weren't many people around. "Let's get out and stretch our legs," Gianna suggested eagerly. "And make sure not to leave anything valuable in the car," Stephen added. I followed their instructions, stepping out of the car, but I noticed Gianna and Stephen hesitating, pretending to be busy inside the car. Once I stepped out and closed the door, I heard the car lock click. Stephen had only left the windows slightly open. Then he burst into laughter. "What's going on? Are we staying here for the night?" I felt anger bubble up towards Gianna, but I kept it in check. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my cool. "You walked right into that one, didn't you?" My husband was laughing so hard he was clutching his stomach. My wallet and cell phone were still in the car. Everything had gone according to Gianna and my husband's plan. "Have fun out here, Sophia," Gianna sneered. "Maybe you can eat some grass and sleep under the stars." My husband, holding my wallet and going through it, closed the window. His laughter died down, and then they drove off, leaving me alone. "Well, there's a handful, and it's hot," I muttered to myself. Even though it was scorching hot and I was at risk of dehydration, I surprisingly didn't panic. An hour later, "Why are you here?" My husband was stunned to see me in the lobby of the inn where we were supposed to stay. "Are you a ghost? Did something happen at the dam?" he asked, looking bewildered. Jana looked like she was about to pass out. I considered teasing them by pretending to be a ghost, but decided against it. "I'm not a ghost, and I'm staying here tonight," I told them, showing him the key to my room. I had already left my luggage there. My husband couldn't grasp the situation and started to get agitated. He thought I had taken the key to their room without permission. "What are you doing? Give it back," he demanded, trying to grab the key from me roughly. Just then a man appeared and grabbed my husband's hand. "Sir, please refrain from causing a disturbance here," the man said firmly. He was about the same age as Robert, but he had a strong build and was taller, making him seem more dependable than my middle-aged, slightly overweight husband. "Who are you? Are you staff here? You can't just interfere with a guest like this. I'll sue you for assault." Jana yelled at the man who had intervened. I apologized for not introducing myself earlier. "I am the owner of this inn," the man replied calmly. Hearing this, my husband quickly let go of my hand. I recognized the owner. Back when I was in college, I visited this area with my friends during summer vacation. It was scorching hot that day, and we got lost on our way to our accommodation. Eventually, we stumbled upon a girl who collapsed on the side of the road. That girl was Mary, the owner's daughter. We called an ambulance and stayed with her until help arrived. The next day, the owner visited us at the inn where we were staying and thanked us profusely. He said, "You saved my daughter's life. Thank you so much." He also offered us this inn, saying, "So next time you're in the area, please stay with us. You won't have to pay." Since then, my family and I have visited the inn several times, so I know the owner well. As he reprimanded my husband and Gianna, he remained polite, but I could sense his underlying anger. Both the owner and I were aware of Gianna and my husband's scheme from the beginning. I had caught wind of their plan 2 weeks ago. Feeling suspicious about their sudden invitation for a trip, I decided to set up a voice recorder in the living room. I targeted times when my husband and Gianna were alone, like when I was taking a bath or doing laundry, and their plan came to light. "I know. Let's ditch Sophia somewhere. It would be hilarious. How about here? There's a gym about an hour's drive from the inn." When I heard their conversation, I was shocked. I immediately called the inn and told the owner everything about the situation I was in and what they were planning. The owner was furious. He had once experienced his daughter collapsing in the heat, so he was even more upset knowing the situation beforehand. The owner arranged for my pickup today. After my husband and Jana's car left, he had me ride in the inn's shuttle. By the way, the driver turned out to be Mary from that incident years ago. "I got my license. I'm going to go for a drive," she said excitedly. "Right now?" I asked, surprised. "Oh, that's great," I replied. We chatted happily, bought some local specialty ice cream on the way, and arrived at the inn. Even though I knew about the plan and that a pickup was coming, I was still worried for Mary, but she knew the area like the back of her hand, so we arrived at the inn several tens of minutes earlier than my husband and Gianna. "You mentioned suing earlier, ma'am," the owner said, looking at Jana sternly. "Yes, I did. It's outrageous to be accused of the opposite," Jana retorted. "I'm sorry, but you're not our guests," the owner replied firmly. "What? Don't mess with us." My husband and Gianna both lost their temper. "Your and your mother's reservations have been canceled," the owner stated plainly. "I added you. Who do you think you are?" My husband was on the verge of losing his temper again, but the owner restrained him. "Kiana did nothing wrong. We, the inn, canceled your reservations," the owner explained calmly. "What do you mean?" my husband demanded. "If you leave a woman alone at a dam in the mountains after stealing her wallet, wouldn't you be committing a crime? We can't allow such people to stay at our inn." We also called the police. My husband and mother-in-law became even more furious at this revelation. "This is no joke. Don't think you can get away with this. I work at a big company," my husband protested. "This little inn in the mountains." Just then, Robert arrived. "Hey, what's going on here?" Sensing the tension, Robert looked around and asked for an explanation. Gianna and my husband appealed to Robert, saying the inn staff were rude and they wanted to stay elsewhere. But when Robert heard what had happened, he was furious. "You idiots!" It was the first time I had seen Robert yell. "How embarrassing! I can't believe we're from the same family. You two, get out of here now." My husband and mother-in-law were stunned by Robert's outburst. "Where to?" "Another inn," they asked, but Robert was firm. "Wait a minute." "That's not possible, Dad," my husband said with a wry smile, but Robert was resolute. "You're disowned. Get out." "No, don't make me say it again." He pushed my husband away. Then the police arrived, and my husband and Gianna turned pale. The owner and I explained the situation to the officer, and I played back the recorded conversation. My husband and Gianna started crying, but Robert intervened. "Quiet down. You're disturbing the inn. Officer, please take them away." "It's not like that, officer. We didn't think it would be such a big deal. It was just a prank," my husband tried to explain, but the officer's expression changed. "A prank? Are you serious? Don't you realize that your little joke could have put someone's life at risk, especially your own wife's?" They were scolded harshly, though they weren't arrested due to it being a family matter. Jana and my husband looked pale throughout the ordeal. "This isn't over. Kiana's feelings will determine your future. Understand?" With those final words, my husband and Jana, still pale, went home. Robert seemed apologetic the entire time. He kept saying, "I'm sorry. I can't apologize enough for not noticing the unpleasant experiences you have been having, for the terrible ordeal you went through today." He also deeply apologized to the inn owner, expressing remorse for the trouble they caused. Interestingly, the inn owner is a businessman who runs several other companies and is also a client of the company where Robert works. Without knowing this, my husband had boasted, "I work for a big company." It's quite a turn of events. Robert and Gianna ended up divorcing as well. Robert severed ties with my ex-husband and kicked him out of the house due to the incident. My ex-husband was advised to resign from his job. It turns out his workplace behavior had been problematic for a while. Just as he treated me poorly, he had been harsh to his colleagues and engineers, and the HR department was already considering taking action against him. Reflecting on my actions, I'm disappointed that I mirrored such behavior. My ex-husband, now unemployed, is struggling to find another job. Despite his age, he lacks a solid track record for managerial positions from his previous company, and he struggles to explain why he left. Jana was also kicked out by Robert and has sought refuge with relatives at her parents' home. However, there are concerns about her spending habits and love for travel. Her relatives fear she might drain their savings if she moves in with them. It might be wise for her to consider finding a part-time job, especially since she's still in good health. So I moved out of my in-laws' house and now live nearby by myself. I'm still friends with Robert, and sometimes I ask him for advice about work issues. Before this, I used to take care of the house and kids, but now I'm starting a new chapter in my life. When I was looking for a job, the owner of a company approached me and asked if I'd like to work for them. He was concerned about how things were going for me. It seemed like he wanted to find a job for me in his company. I happily agreed to join. I felt thankful for his kindness. I expressed my gratitude, but he insisted that they were the ones who should be grateful. It felt like I had already returned the favor from before, and now I needed to give something back. The company he recommended me to is well known and treats its employees well. It was a pleasant surprise. Interestingly, it's in the same industry that my ex-husband used to brag about, but this company is much bigger. Everyone there is friendly, and I'm enjoying my days much more now than when I was dealing with marital problems. Thanks for watching. How did you find the story? Let me know in the comments below. Remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more awesome stories like this. Your feedback and support mean a lot.
This morning, my mother-in-law grumbled about the soup I served for breakfast. "Why is this so bland? It's watery and it's just not good," she complained. "Make it richer, will you?" I calmly replied, "But the doctor told you to watch your salt intake."
Who cares about that?
"I like bold, rich flavors," she shot back. My mother-in-law, or MIL for short, is always complaining about the food I cook. She's obsessed with heavily seasoned meals, yet she's overweight and borderline diabetic. Her doctor has warned her multiple times to avoid salt and watch what she eats, but she doesn't seem to care. No matter how much effort I put into preparing low-sodium dishes, she always adds more seasoning to her plate, completely ignoring the doctor's advice. This morning was no different. She dumped a ridiculous amount of salt and pepper into the soup I had carefully made. I couldn't believe it. I had gone out of my way to use low-sodium ingredients, and yet she acted like it was still lacking. Honestly, I sometimes worry that she's going to cause serious harm to herself with the way she eats. If she keeps this up, she might face some serious health consequences, but to tell you the truth, I wouldn't exactly be heartbroken if she did. MIL seems to enjoy making my life difficult. It feels like all she does is criticize and show her dislike toward me. By the way, my name is Lauren. I'm 31, and while I work, I also take care of the house. I've been married to my husband for 4 years. We don't have any children, though. The reason? My infertility. Unfortunately, MIL never lets me forget it. She constantly throws hurtful comments my way. "You're worthless as a woman if you can't have children," she sneers. "You're defective. You should be thankful you're even allowed to stay in this house." Her words hit me hard every time. I don't know how to respond to such cruelty. "I guess you're right. I must be defective since I can't have kids," I mutter, feeling broken inside. We've tried so many times, and each attempt has ended in disappointment. Life can feel really unfair sometimes. To make things worse, my husband usually agrees with her. He even laughs along with MIL's harsh comments. "Well, she's got a point," he says with a grin, as if this is all just some sort of joke. I can't believe it. How can he be so insensitive? I want to have a baby more than anything. I've been seeing an obstetrician, trying everything possible while managing my job and household, but nothing has worked. It's exhausting, both physically and emotionally, and I've finally reached the point where I can't take it anymore. I've decided to stop the treatments. They're draining in every way, and they cost a fortune. It's hard to keep spending money on something that feels so hopeless. What makes it worse is that my husband used to say the treatments were a waste of money. Yet, at the same time, he constantly pressured me to get pregnant. "Why aren't you pregnant yet? What's taking so long?" he'd ask, as if I wasn't trying my hardest. How could I possibly make it happen any faster? If it were that simple, I wouldn't be going through all of this. I thought that maybe, just maybe, stopping the treatments would ease some of the pressure, but the tension in our home still lingers. I once entertained the idea that maybe, just maybe, my husband and I could live happily ever after, just the two of us. No kids, just us. But that dream felt impossible with my mother-in-law still clinging to her hope of having a grandchild. She wouldn't let go of it no matter what. One day, she came prancing into the living room, holding a pack of diapers with a smirk on her face. "Look, I bought diapers," she announced, waving them in my direction. I blinked, caught off guard by the sight of them. "Excuse me?" I said, trying to mask my confusion. "You'll need them eventually," she chirped, clearly enjoying herself. I couldn't help but feel a little irritated. Aren't those a bit small for you?" I asked, pretending to miss the point. "Very funny. These are for a baby, obviously." "Can't you see that?" she shot back, laughing like it was the funniest thing in the world. "Well, I wouldn't know, I muttered, unable to hide the bitterness creeping into my voice. I'm just the defective woman who can't have children, remember? Her laughter stopped for a moment, and then she shrugged. That's enough, she said, her mood souring. Frustrated, she stormed off to her room, leaving me standing there, exhausted and drained. After working all day, I didn't have the energy to deal with her snide remarks and never-ending jabs. I let out a quiet sigh of relief as she disappeared. I was just too tired to keep putting up with her nonsense. Some days it felt like making my life miserable was her full-time job. The truth is, my husband and I had moved in with her after my father-in-law passed away about a year ago. She was devastated at the time, and understandably so. Around that same time, her doctor had warned her that she was at high risk for developing diabetes. My husband, being the kind-hearted person he is, insisted we move in to help her cope and take care of her. He wanted to be there for his mom, especially with her health at risk. But honestly, she wasn't as fragile as she let on. As long as she took her medication and followed a decent diet, she was fine. There wasn't much to worry about except for the fact that she didn't actually follow the doctor's orders. She often neglected her medication and ate whatever junk food she felt like. At this rate, her condition was bound to worsen sooner or later. And when that happened, I had no intention of being the one stuck taking care of her. I mean, I'm still in my 20s, working hard, juggling a career and household responsibilities. The last thing I want is to spend my youth caring for my in-laws. No, thank you. The next day was my day off, and I was busy doing chores around the house. Normally, my mother-in-law just lounges around, snacking on the couch while I work, but today was different. Out of nowhere, she stood up and walked straight into my room. I watched her go, too occupied with laundry to stop her. A few minutes later, she came out and proudly announced, "I cleaned your room for you." I forced a smile. "Oh, thank you," I said, but something didn't feel right. There was a strange vibe in the air. Why would she clean my room? She never does anything like that. Was she trying to be helpful, or was there something more to it? As I folded clothes, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fishy was going on. "I should switch rooms with my husband," she suddenly suggested, out of nowhere.
What?
"Why?" I asked, caught off guard by her comment. She smirked. "Well, if you keep leaving your room in such a mess, you're bound to get bugs in there. But honestly, it suits you," she added with a laugh. I just nodded along, feeling more confused than ever. "Uh-huh. Sure. Thanks for the clean room," I said, playing along, though her words kept nagging at me. As she walked away, she seemed pleased with herself, like she'd done me some huge favor. I wasn't fooled. Her sudden interest in cleaning my space was suspicious. What was she up to? That night, I decided to sleep in my husband's room. He had been away on a business trip since the day before, so he wouldn't know. And even if he did find out, I knew he wouldn't get mad. Our relationship had cooled off in recent months, anyway. We kept separate bedrooms, partly because I worked regular hours as a nurse and partly because we needed our space. I didn't want to disturb him when he came home late, and to be honest, our marriage wasn't what it used to be. Still, I had a gut feeling that something was off with my mother-in-law. Whether she was trying to snoop or make a point, I wasn't about to let her get under my skin. When I work the night shift, I usually wait until my mother-in-law, or MIL as I call her, goes to her room before heading to my husband's bedroom to sleep. Once I'm sure she's settled, I think to myself, all right, she's in her room. Time for me to get some rest, and then I quietly slip into my husband's room. For 5 days, I slept there without any problems, but it didn't take long for MIL to get suspicious. She must have noticed I seemed too cheerful for her liking, and suddenly, she began asking strange questions. "Don't you feel any pain or discomfort?" she asked out of nowhere. "Huh? What do you mean?" I replied, genuinely confused. "Oh, never mind," she said, quickly brushing off the question. It was odd, to say the least. I couldn't help but wonder if she was suspecting something or trying to hint at something. She avoided eye contact after that and ate her meal alone in silence. That same day, I had the night shift at the hospital, so I planned to take it easy at home before heading out for work. Unfortunately, relaxation is a luxury I rarely enjoy. My Emile never lifts a finger to help around the house. She prefers to boss me around, giving orders from her favorite spot on the couch, where she lounges all day, snacking and reading Italian comics aimed at women. As I passed by her, I caught a glimpse of the cover of her comic book. The English translation was terrible, as usual, and the title was something like Epic Mother and Daughter-in-Law Swamp Battle. I rolled my eyes at her choice of reading material. Of course, she'd be interested in stories about toxic mother-in-law and daughter-in-law relationships. It seemed like her personal guidebook for making my life more difficult. Hours later, my husband finally returned from his business trip, but it was already 9 p.m. He looked exhausted as he dropped his bags by the door. Ugh, I'm beat. I'm going to hop in the bath, he said, heading straight to the bathroom. Sure, I'll heat it up for you. Grab a beer in the meantime, I offered, trying to be helpful. Thanks. I think I'll do that, he replied, but as I turned to leave, I suddenly remembered something. Wait, I called out, stopping him in his tracks. It's not safe to drink alcohol before a bath, you know. He sighed, looking disappointed. Fine, I'll settle for a non-alcoholic beer then. Reluctantly, he grabbed a non-alcoholic beer from the fridge. I warned him because, despite how obvious it might seem, mixing booze with hot water can be dangerous. You'd think he'd know better after all. Even the public baths have signs warning people not to enter if they're drunk. But common sense isn't so common, not with him, and certainly not with my mother-in-law. After finishing his drink, my husband took his bath, and to my dismay, he began singing loudly. We live in a single-family home, but still, belting out tunes at this hour? It was almost 9:45 p.m. I could already picture our annoyed neighbors glaring at their clocks. Hey, you're too loud. I shouted through the door, hoping he'd get the message. Shut it. You're the one who's being loud, he yelled back, clearly not getting the point. I warned you quietly, so stop singing already. I snapped, growing more frustrated by the minute. Right on cue, Emile chimed in, coming into the bathroom area, like she was part of the argument. James is just trying to enjoy himself by singing. What's your problem? She said, defending him as usual. Seriously? I muttered under my breath. Then, of course, she had to add, you really don't know how to treat your husband, do you? Always inconsiderate and full of complaints. I couldn't help but roll my eyes. Hey, I'm not the one constantly complaining, Emile. I shot back, already regretting engaging her. Back talk, huh? You're definitely not cute. Not that you're much of a beauty to begin with, she sneered, clearly trying to get under my skin. That's fine by me. I'm probably a knockout beauty in some other country, I said, brushing off her insult with a smirk. I wasn't about to let her have the last word. She just laughed and wandered off, leaving me alone to finish getting ready for my night shift. Meanwhile, my husband got out of the bath and started drinking again. I glanced at the clock. It was already past 9:45 p.m., and I had to leave for work soon. Even though the hospital isn't far from our home, there's always a lot to do before my shift starts. And dealing with my MIL and husband was just one more thing adding to the weight of the day. As I gathered my things to head out, I sighed, wondering if there would ever be a day when life didn't feel this overwhelming. I need to leave early tonight, I told my husband, grabbing my bag and getting ready for my night shift. Oh, and by the way, I've been sleeping in your room for the past few nights. Would you mind switching rooms and sleeping in mine tonight? My clothes are scattered everywhere, and I didn't have time to clean up. Sure, it doesn't matter to me, he replied casually, not giving it much thought. All right, I'm off then. Take care, I whispered, making sure to speak quietly so my mother-in-law wouldn't overhear. Just as I was about to leave, I heard a loud groan behind me. Startled, I turned around to see my husband curled up on the floor, clutching his leg in pain. James, what happened? I rushed over to him, feeling a wave of panic rising. He couldn't even speak. His face twisted in pain, and he was sweating, groaning in agony. My mother-in-law, or Emile as I call her, went pale, her eyes wide with panic. What's going on? James, speak to me, she cried, her voice shaking. But no matter what I asked, my husband couldn't respond. He just lay there on the floor, clutching his leg and moaning in pain. My heart raced, and I knew I had to act fast. But then something strange caught my attention. The floor felt unusually slippery under my feet. Even though I was wearing socks, it was so slick that I almost lost my balance just standing there. What the heck is going on? Why is the floor so slippery? I blurted out, looking around in confusion. James, are you okay? I asked, but he was in too much pain to answer. I glanced over at my MIL, who stood there frozen, her face pale as a ghost. Mel, what did you do? I snapped, trying to figure out how this had happened. I didn't do anything, she stammered. It's not my fault. Blaming her wouldn't help the situation, so I focused on getting help. Without wasting another second, I called an ambulance. My mind was racing, and work was the last thing on my mind now. My husband needed medical attention, and that was all that mattered. When the paramedics arrived, they quickly assessed the situation and rushed him to the hospital, ironically, the same hospital where I work. Throughout the ride, James clutched his leg, wincing in pain. His face was drenched in sweat, and you could tell he was suffering badly. I held his hand, trying to comfort him. Hang in there, I whispered, though I wasn't sure if he could even hear me over the pain. When we got to the hospital, a doctor immediately examined him. After some tests and x-rays, the doctor gave us the diagnosis. It was a 5th metatarsal fracture. My husband had broken a bone in his foot, most likely from slipping on the slick floor. His foot was swollen and bruised, and the pain had been unbearable. The doctor explained that this type of fracture often happens when someone twists their ankle or puts too much weight on their foot while falling. Hearing this, my mind flashed back to when I had twisted my own ankle years ago while walking down the stairs. I was lost in the music coming through my headphones, not paying attention to where I was stepping. I heard a loud snap, followed by an excruciating pain that nearly made me collapse. I ended up with the same kind of fracture my husband had now, a 5th metatarsal fracture. The memory made me wince in sympathy for what he was going through. Thankfully, my husband's injury didn't require surgery or hospitalization, so after they bandaged him up and gave him some pain medication, he was allowed to come home. I was supposed to work the night shift that day, but my nursing supervisor insisted I take the night off to care for my husband. She was genuinely concerned, telling me, "It's not a life-threatening situation, but you should be with him." I appreciated her understanding. When we got back home, James was still in pain and looked pale. "I feel awful. I think I've got a fever," he groaned. "Well, you did break your leg," I said gently. It's not unusual to feel feverish after something like that. But what I really want to know is why the floor was so slippery in the first place. What happened? I couldn't shake the suspicion that my MIL had something to do with it. She was acting way too nervous, and her behavior didn't sit right with me. "Why don't we ask Mill about that, huh?" I said, looking in her direction. She was standing off to the side, avoiding eye contact. "Hey, what did you do to the floor in the room?" I asked, my tone firm. MIL hesitated for a moment, then finally spoke up. Well, the floor was a little slippery, but I didn't mean for him to get hurt. I greased the floor," she admitted, stumbling over her words. I stared at her, stunned. "What do you mean you greased the floor? Why would you do something like that?" "Well, that room is supposed to be for my daughter-in-law," she mumbled, looking away. "I didn't think anyone else would be in there." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She had deliberately made the floor slippery to mess with me, and my husband had paid the price. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. As much as I wanted to scream at her, I knew there was no point. What was done was done. "Next time, think before you act, MIL," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You could have seriously hurt someone." I was hoping my daughter-in-law would slip, so I put a lot of grease on the floor. "I didn't expect you to go in there and fall," my mother-in-law admitted. I couldn't believe it. It turns out she had purposely made the floor slippery, planning for me to fall. She pretended to clean the room, but her real intention was to put me in danger. I was furious. If I had walked into that room, I could have seriously hurt myself. Breaking a leg would have been the least of my worries. What if I had hit my head? That could have been fatal. What she did was beyond reckless. It was dangerous and criminal. "You're despicable," I snapped. "You're not even family to me anymore. I got hurt because of you. I'm calling the police." "Wait a minute." I didn't directly hurt anyone, did I? She stammered, trying to defend herself. Your wife told you to go in there, didn't she? So it's her fault, not mine. Shut up. That's not the point, my husband shouted, dialing the police with fury in his eyes. My mother-in-law tried to grab the phone from him, but even with his broken leg, my husband was stronger. He held onto his phone and continued speaking to the police. As I watched the chaos unfold, I couldn't help but think, I'd rather be at work, even dealing with the stress of the hospital, than this mess. Our neighbors were bound to find out about this awful situation soon. I started thinking that maybe I should call the police too. After all, she almost hurt me as well. You know, I said, this could be considered attempted harm. You might be charged.
No.
I don't want to be taken to the police, she cried, panic spreading across her face. Really? You knew what could happen when you did this, I said, my voice calm but firm. Or did you think you could just get rid of me without any consequences? She hesitated before admitting, well, I did think it might be better if you just disappeared. My heart sank. Wow, you're the worst. Your way of thinking is criminal. Honestly, I wish you'd just stay in jail forever. I turned to my husband. Let's get a divorce.
What?
Over this? He asked, shocked. Yes, over this. You've looked down on me, called me defective, and you have no idea how much that hurt. I can't live with that anymore. I can live without you just fine. No, please don't say that. I need you, he pleaded. I was counting on your income. I even got a new car contract. What? I asked, feeling a mix of disbelief and anger. I finally got the Toyota Century I've always wanted from Italy, he said, almost sheepishly. I don't care anymore, I replied firmly. I quickly cleaned the greasy floor, then grabbed a bag and started packing my belongings. I took off my wedding ring and placed it on the table. As I rummaged through a shelf filled with dishes, I remembered something. The divorce papers. I found them, the ones he had written a while ago, just in case. We had agreed that if I couldn't have a child within 3 years, we'd get divorced. Well, I can't have children now, so let's end this, I told him. You must be feeling relieved. Wait, what about the loan for my car? He asked, looking worried. Who cares? I said, not interested in his problems anymore. I left the house and headed straight to the hospital. When I arrived, the head nurse, who was always kind, didn't ask questions. She seemed to understand that I had my reasons for showing up like that. As a nurse, I knew I could support myself. I didn't need a husband. I started wondering why I had stayed in that awful house, being treated like a servant by my in-laws and putting up with their rude comments. It all seemed so ridiculous now. I made up my mind to focus on my job and leave that part of my life behind. The next morning, I filed for divorce. My now ex-husband had caused me so much emotional pain that I consulted a lawyer about getting compensation. In the end, he had to pay me, and I couldn't help but think, serves you right. Since the police got involved, our neighbors started avoiding my mother-in-law. She had told them the story of how my ex-husband broke his leg, and now everyone thought she was a terrible person. It didn't take long before my ex-husband wanted nothing to do with her anymore, and it seems he kicked her out. She's been crying ever since, saying she can't live on her own. She receives some kind of survivor's benefits, but it's not much. Given how much she used to eat, our grocery bills were always outrageous. Now, she'd have to live a very modest life. As for my ex-husband, I don't care what happens to him anymore. He had mentioned something about a car loan, but I have no idea how that turned out. I assumed he wouldn't be able to afford it on his salary. He always took me for granted, thinking I would help pay for everything. It annoyed me so much. Even though he wasn't wealthy, he still went ahead and bought a new car without thinking. Later on, I started dating a doctor I met at the hospital. For years after that, we got married, and to our surprise, we were blessed with a child. It felt like a miracle after everything I had been through. Now, I'm focused on doing my best for my new family, and I couldn't be happier. After returning from a week-long international trip, I was surprised when my mother-in-law, Grace, called me. Her voice had an unusual tone of triumph, and she mentioned something about a $40,000 windfall that we had apparently saved. Her statement left me confused. As a freelance jewelry designer, I do have a savings account for emergencies, but I certainly hadn't stashed away that kind of money recently. Plus, I always kept my bank card with me, and no one else had access to withdraw such a significant amount. Grace then casually said over the phone he gave it to me, so I took it from the sideboard drawer. "You guys are doing well, so it's fine." Her words stunned me. Before I could ask her to explain, she quickly thanked me and hinted at relying on me for financial support in the future, then abruptly hung up. I was left utterly bewildered. What money was she talking about? Where did this $40,000 come from? Or go? When my husband Thomas returned home later, he cleared up the mystery. Thankfully, it was just a misunderstanding. Still, I couldn't shake off the strange interaction. A month later, things took a frustrating turn. Grace started bombarding me with phone calls. At first, I ignored them, thinking it wasn't urgent. But when I glanced at my phone and saw over 55 missed calls, I knew I couldn't avoid her anymore. I finally picked up the phone, and the moment I did, Grace's voice erupted in anger. She accused me of ignoring her and acted as if she was the victim. Her tone made it clear that she believed she had been wronged. From my perspective, however, this was simply the fallout of her own assumptions. Let me explain a bit about my life. My name is Jessica, and I'm a 37-year-old freelance jewelry designer. I love my work, but it keeps me incredibly busy. My husband Thomas and I are also trying to start a family, but balancing my growing business with my personal life is overwhelming. Thomas used to work in a stable corporate job, but a few years ago, as my business started to take off, he decided to leave his position and join me full-time. His skills in management have been invaluable in helping our business flourish. In the early days of our marriage, my jewelry gigs were sporadic, and we relied on Thomas's steady paycheck. But as my designs gained recognition, our roles shifted. Thomas now helps manage everything from contracts to operations. We've even secured partnerships with prestigious international brands, which has transformed our lives, but also brought new challenges. One of those challenges is dealing with Thomas's mother, Grace. She lives alone in the family home and often views our lifestyle through a distorted lens. To her, our hard work and professional obligations look like indulgent luxury. "You two are always living so lavishly. I'm jealous," she would say, misunderstanding the nature of our expenses. For example, as part of my job, I often attend high-end product launches and networking dinners with executives. Grace, however, sees these events as leisure outings rather than work obligations. Her envy frequently leads to financial requests. Once, she told me, "I'm planning to throw a party for my friends soon. Can you give me some money for it?" While it might seem like we could afford such things easily, the truth is that maintaining our business image involves significant costs, and our budget is tightly managed. Despite explaining this to Grace repeatedly, her requests became more persistent. She would often say things like, "You're always dressed so beautifully and eating at fancy places. I envy you." Her sarcasm and jealousy made it clear she didn't understand the sacrifices behind our apparent success. While I often refused her requests, Thomas took a different approach. If giving her a little money keeps her quiet, then it's worth it, he'd argue. For him, it was easier to offer small financial help to maintain peace rather than deal with the disruptions her complaints might cause. Unfortunately, this approach only encouraged Grace. Her demands started to escalate over time, and her perception of our financial situation became more unrealistic. Living this way has been a balancing act, not just with our careers but also with managing family dynamics. While Thomas and I work hard to build a successful business and prepare for the future, Grace seems to see us as an endless source of financial support. Little did I know, her assumptions would soon lead to even bigger misunderstandings. Recently, Grace expressed a desire for a new dress to wear to an upcoming gathering. She even came over to our place to pester Thomas about it. "Wouldn't a two-piece suit work instead?" Thomas suggested, trying to steer her towards something more practical. But Grace wasn't having it. She argued that while there might be cheaper options, what she wanted was a high-end outfit. I tried to explain that her choice was unnecessarily expensive, but she immediately countered, saying, "It's a fancy party. I can't be the only one there in old clothes." To make matters worse, she insisted she needed a matching handbag to go with the outfit, leaving Thomas and me completely exasperated. To help manage her frequent requests, Thomas had previously set up a credit card in Grace's name for her personal expenses. Initially, she went overboard with her spending, and Thomas had to caution her about sticking to reasonable limits. He asked her to let us know before making significant purchases, but Grace continued her pattern of extravagant spending as if the card had no limits. One day, Grace proudly told us, "I discovered an exquisite ring and couldn't resist buying it. But I regret not informing you beforehand. The bill was quite high." This left Thomas and me in a tough spot. Her unrestrained spending was becoming unsustainable for us. "If this continues, maybe it's best to take back the card," I suggested to Thomas. Even though the card was in Grace's name, Thomas was responsible for paying the bills. Grace seemed to view the card as a bottomless resource, not understanding that every purchase had to be paid for out of our pockets. Recognizing the need for better control, Thomas decided to set a spending limit on her card to curb her expenses. This did not sit well with Grace. One day, she stormed into our house, visibly upset. "What the heck is going on? I couldn't pay for my shopping yesterday."
Why did you limit my card? She demanded.
We explained that her excessive spending was putting a strain on our finances, and setting a limit was necessary to manage it. "But it's still enough for your needs, right?" Thomas asked, trying to maintain peace. Grace was unimpressed. "You two still dress up, go to fancy places, and spend money on all sorts of things. How is what I'm doing any different?" she argued. She saw our professional obligations, like attending product launches and high-profile events, as nothing more than fun and leisure. "It's part of our job, Grace," I tried to explain. "If that's a job, then what I'm doing isn't any different," she snapped. "It's unfair that you two get to enjoy all the fun while I'm left behind." Her misunderstanding of our work only made the situation more frustrating. While it's true that our business involves attending glamorous events, these aren't just social outings. They're necessary for building relationships and maintaining our professional image. Despite her protests, setting a limit on Grace's credit card helped calm things down for a while. Occasionally, she would visit and complain to Thomas about feeling left out, but overall, things seemed more manageable. As the year progressed, an exciting opportunity came our way. A well-known foreign brand approached us with a proposal to expand our business by relocating overseas. The idea was thrilling. It could elevate my career as a jewelry designer to new heights and open doors to becoming one of the top-tier designers in the industry. Thomas, ever supportive and forward-thinking, encouraged me to take the leap. "This is a chance we can't pass up," he said with enthusiasm. We both agreed that moving abroad was the right decision for our business and our future. However, one major concern loomed over us: Grace. Given her past behavior, we knew there was a high chance she would insist on coming with us. The thought of managing her demands while adapting to a new country was daunting, to say the least. When we finally broke the news to Grace that we were planning to move overseas, her reaction was exactly what we had feared. "I want to come too," she declared without hesitation, assuming our relocation was going to be some sort of endless vacation. Thomas tried to explain gently, "We're moving for work, Grace. It won't be as leisurely as you think." But Grace was skeptical. "You're trying to trick me," she said, narrowing her eyes. "You plan to live even more lavishly over there, and you don't want me around to see it." Her response left us speechless. While we were excited about this new chapter in our lives, we realized it wouldn't be without its challenges, especially when it came to handling Grace's unrealistic expectations. Grace accused us of lying about our plans to move overseas. "You're not moving there permanently," she insisted. "You'll come back after your work is done." I tried to reassure her. "That's true. We're not planning to stay forever. We'll come back after our project is finished," I said, hoping to ease her concerns. But Grace wasn't convinced. "You're just saying that to calm me down. You're planning to leave me behind, aren't you?" she retorted, her voice filled with suspicion. Exhausted from the repetitive argument, Thomas and I felt drained. Finally, Thomas suggested a compromise. "Okay, we can't take you with us, but how about we pay for a week-long trip for you instead? Grace's mood instantly shifted. Really? Are you sure? She asked, her face lighting up. We'll cover your flight and hotel, but you'll have to manage your other expenses, Thomas clarified. Grace seemed pleased, at least for the moment, and we were relieved to have temporarily resolved the issue. However, the peace didn't last long. A few days later, while Thomas was busy finalizing arrangements for our move, Grace dropped by unexpectedly. Hey Jessica, I've been thinking I want to shop over there too. Can you give me some money for that? She asked, looking hopeful. What about the card Thomas gave you? I replied, knowing she already had a designated credit card for personal expenses. Her face fell. That's the thing. Thomas took it away from me the other day, she admitted. It appeared Thomas had confiscated the card after she overspent again. Anticipating the complications of managing her spending with international currency rates, he had decided it was best to cut her access altogether. I don't have that kind of money on hand, I told her firmly. I can't give you anything without Thomas's approval. Can you ask him? It's no use asking him. That's why I'm coming to you, she pressed, her frustration growing. She raised her voice, but I stood my ground. Despite her persistence, I couldn't give her what she wanted. Eventually, Grace did go on a 12-day trip abroad. I assumed Thomas had managed to fund it somehow, though he hadn't mentioned the details to me. When she returned, she called me, her voice brimming with excitement. I'm back. It was amazing. I had so much fun, she gushed, sharing stories of sightseeing and fancy dinners without me even asking. She continued, oh, and I bought so many souvenirs that I couldn't fit them in my suitcase. I had them shipped here instead. I can't wait for them to arrive. That's nice, I replied, keeping my tone neutral despite feeling overwhelmed by her enthusiasm. Thanks to the money you saved up, I had a blast, she exclaimed, catching me off guard. Saved up money?
What are you talking about?
I asked, alarmed. I had no recollection of setting aside money for her. I found it in the sideboard drawer in your house, she replied casually. It was $40,000. I took it and used it. Her words left me stunned. Why would such a large amount of cash be stashed in a drawer? And how could she think it was okay to take it? Trying to stay calm, I said, Grace, taking money from our house without permission is theft, even if you're family. Do you understand how serious this is? Grace shrugged off my words. That's why I'm telling you now. I used it. Consider it a post-fact report, she said unapologetically. I have no idea where this money came from, but if you took it and spent it without telling anyone, that's a crime, I explained. And if Thomas had set it aside for something important, it's even worse. Grace didn't seem fazed. You two live so extravagantly. Why can't I have a little of that? Think of it as doing a favor for your parent. It's not a big deal, right? She rationalized, her tone filled with entitlement. It's one thing to ask for help, I replied, still in disbelief. But taking money without asking is not okay. I'm glad you enjoyed your trip, but I'll have to discuss this with Thomas when he gets back. Grace, undeterred, said confidently, Thomas will understand. After all, I'm his mother and $40,000 isn't much to him. That evening, when Thomas returned home, he seemed troubled. Jessica, do you know about the money I left in the sideboard drawer? He asked urgently. What money? I asked, already suspecting the worst. 15 days ago, I withdrew $40,000 from the bank for an urgent payment, but now it's gone. Keeping such a large sum in the drawer was careless, but I needed it readily available for a transaction. Do you know anything about it? It all clicked. Grace's earlier call, her stories about the trip, and her casual mention of taking money. It was Thomas's money she had spent. Thomas, I said, Grace called me today to thank us for $40,000 and said she had a great time on her trip. I didn't understand what she meant until now. Thomas's expression shifted from confusion to frustration as he realized what had happened. She took the money? He asked, his voice filled with disbelief. The situation had escalated far beyond the usual family drama, and we both knew it wasn't going to be easy to resolve. I sat down, piecing together everything Thomas had shared. The $40,000 Grace had taken was Thomas's, but I still didn't fully understand its purpose. Thomas, why did you withdraw such a large sum in cash? We usually handle payments through bank transfers, especially for business. Why the sudden shift to cash? I asked, still trying to grasp the bigger picture. Thomas sighed, the weariness clear in his voice. He began to explain, after I reduced the limit on Grace's credit card, she started secretly borrowing money from various sources, consumer finance cards, credit cards, ones she opened without telling us. When I discovered how much debt she'd accumulated, I took away all her cards to stop the spiral. I withdrew cash to settle her debts directly, bypassing the banking system to keep our business accounts clean. I wanted to handle this discreetly, especially since we're moving abroad and won't be around to help her manage things anymore. He paused before continuing. This was meant as a farewell gesture, my way of tying up loose ends before we leave. But Grace didn't use the money for what it was intended. Instead, she blew it on that trip. Hearing this, I felt a mix of anger and frustration. Thomas's intentions had been noble, but Grace's actions had undermined his efforts. As I processed the situation, a month passed, and we were deep in preparations for our overseas move. During that time, Grace's calls became more frequent and impossible to ignore. When I finally answered one of her calls, her voice was filled with desperation. Why haven't you been answering my calls? I've tried so many times, she cried, sounding close to tears. I'm sorry, Grace. I've been caught up with packing for the move. What's going on? I asked, trying to stay calm and give her a chance to explain. It's everything, Jessica. They're asking for payments every day. It's too much, she confessed, her voice breaking. Have you tried contacting Thomas about this? I asked, hoping she'd sought his help first. He's blocking my calls. I can't get through to him at all. Jessica, you're my only hope now. Please help me, she pleaded, her desperation evident. It was then I realized how deeply Grace's financial recklessness had trapped her. With Thomas cutting off her access and refusing to engage, she was turning to me as her last resort. The situation had grown more complicated than I had imagined. When Thomas returned home, I relayed Grace's pleas to him. He listened, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and resignation. I had planned to sort this out before we left, Jessica. But she squandered the chance I gave her. That money was meant to settle her debts, and instead, she used it for a luxury vacation. What else can I do? He said, his voice cold. His frustration was justified, but I still felt uneasy about blocking Grace entirely. Yet, with our business expansion underway and our financial resources already stretched thin, there was no room to take on Grace's burden, especially after she had misused the funds. Despite my lingering guilt, I followed Thomas's lead and blocked her number, focusing on our move. As the chaos of packing consumed my days, another shocking piece of news surfaced. Grace had sold her house, the family home where Thomas had grown up, in an attempt to manage her mounting debts. But even after selling the property, the money wasn't enough to cover everything she owed. The realization that the home was gone was devastating. Thomas, the family home is gone. Are you okay with that? I asked, sensing the sadness he was trying to mask. He shook his head, his voice tinged with sorrow. How can I be okay with it? That house was where I grew up, where so many memories were made. But there's nothing we can do now. It's her choice, and we're not in a position to help anymore. Losing the house felt like losing a piece of Thomas's childhood, a profound and irreversible loss. It was heartbreaking to see him wrestle with these emotions while knowing there was no way to salvage the situation. The house, a symbol of stability and family, was gone, and with it, a part of Grace's ability to recover from her financial chaos. As we prepared to leave for our new life overseas, the weight of what had transpired lingered heavily. Grace's actions had strained our relationships, depleted resources, and left Thomas with the painful realization that he could no longer shield his mother from the consequences of her own choices. The move promised a fresh start, but it was bittersweet, knowing we were leaving behind not just our old life, but also unresolved family turmoil. The loss of a family home is a profound experience, one I had endured earlier in life, when my parents' house was taken away. Watching Thomas go through a similar ordeal brought back those emotions, but his situation felt even more complicated. Unlike my past, Thomas wasn't just losing the physical place where his earliest memories were formed. He was losing a deep emotional sanctuary. To make it harder, his mother, Grace, was still alive, a painful reminder of the circumstances that led to this loss. It's hard to describe the feeling of losing a family home. It's not just about bricks and mortar. It's about losing a piece of one's identity and the comfort of knowing there's a place to return to, a constant amidst life's changes. The house becomes a symbol of security, memories, and history, something Thomas could no longer hold on to. The absence of that anchor weighed heavily on both of us as we prepared to leave for a new chapter in a different country. Grace, now living in a modest apartment, faced a stark new reality. Her days were consumed by managing her debts and working part-time to stay afloat. For someone her age, finding work was not only challenging but often exhausting and unrewarding. The life she now led was a drastic shift from the unchecked spending and financial freedom she once enjoyed. While it was hard not to feel sympathy for her, it was tempered by the understanding that her current situation was a result of her financial recklessness. Life has a way of teaching us that actions have consequences, and Grace's case reaffirmed that hard truth. No matter your age or stage in life, financial responsibility is crucial. Her struggles served as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the importance of planning and restraint, even when life seems comfortable. Meanwhile, our new life abroad began to flourish. The move had propelled our business into the international spotlight, far exceeding our expectations. Inquiries and offers poured in from all over the world. Each new email or call brought exciting opportunities for expansion and collaboration, but it also demanded more of our time and energy. The thrill of success was undeniable, yet it consumed our lives entirely. Days blurred into nights as we juggled time zones, cultural nuances, and an endless stream of tasks, all to seize this golden opportunity. Our personal lives, however, bore the weight of this relentless pursuit of professional growth. The dream of expanding our family, something Thomas and I had talked about for years, seemed increasingly distant. We told ourselves we'd revisit that dream once things settled down, but deep down, we knew that the demands of our work wouldn't ease anytime soon. Thomas felt the strain acutely, balancing roles that ranged from logistics to client management. As partners in life and business, we both struggled to align our professional goals with our personal desires. We often found ourselves asking, how do we make room for the life we want, while navigating the pressures of the life we've built? Sometimes I would pause to look out the window of our apartment. The view of the sprawling cityscape was breathtaking. Neon lights blurred into the night sky, reflecting the blur of our own lives. This city, vibrant and relentless, was now our home. Yet it stood in stark contrast to the quiet, familiar streets we had left behind. The life we were building here was filled with promise, but also came with challenges we hadn't anticipated. It was exciting, but it was daunting. Amidst the excitement and chaos of our new chapter, my thoughts often drifted back to Grace and the lessons her situation held for us. Her financial recklessness and its consequences served as a stark reminder of how deeply intertwined our choices are with our futures. Every decision we make, whether personal or professional, shapes not only our immediate circumstances, but also the legacy we leave behind. As I reflected on this, I realized the importance of balance. Our drive for success couldn't come at the expense of the relationships that defined us. While our business achievements brought us pride and recognition, they weren't the only markers of a meaningful life. Building this new phase meant finding ways to nurture both our dreams and the connections that mattered most. Thomas and I resolved to approach this chapter with mindfulness, striving to maintain the delicate balance between ambition and personal fulfillment. After all, success isn't just about reaching the top, it's about the journey and the people who walk it with you. I'm a 17-year-old female who graduated high school a year early. Instead of taking a break, I decided to dive straight into college. Last year, I completed a semester at a community college to get ahead, and now I've moved on to campus to finish my degree. Before leaving, I lived with my mom, who's 43, and her husband Jack, 50. I moved in with them halfway through high school because I wanted to be closer to my younger siblings, Patricia, a tween, and Adam, a pre-tween, before life got busier and I had less time for family. While I loved being near my brother and sister, living with Jack was incredibly challenging. From the very beginning, it was clear that Jack and his family didn't like me. When he and my mom got together, they made me feel like an outsider. At family gatherings, I was invited but ignored. I'd have a seat at the table, but no one talked to me. Instead of being in family photos, I was the one asked to take them. Whenever I tried to join in or connect, I was told that it was just for the family, a phrase that stung every time. Things became worse after my siblings were born. Jack's family warmly embraced them, showering them with love and attention, while making it blatantly clear they didn't want anything to do with me. Jack himself would plan family outings but either leave me at home or tell me outright that I wasn't invited. One of the most hurtful moments came on Mother's Day a few years ago. Jack's sister gave my mom a locket with pictures of Patricia and Adam, saying it was so she could always keep her two children close to her heart. My mom didn't even glance at me, let alone acknowledge the hurt I was feeling. After that, I stopped trying. I realized I'd never truly be part of this new family because they simply didn't want me there. Over the past year, I began quietly packing my things, either sending them to my dad's house or preparing them for when I moved to college. On Sunday, the day finally came for me to leave. I packed everything up and left for my dorm, ready to focus on my own life and leave behind a situation where I always felt unwanted. Despite the challenges, I'm excited for this fresh start and the chance to build a future on my own terms. I plan to take all my stuff in my car and drive myself to campus for move-in day. My dad met me there, and we spent the day decorating my dorm room together. My mom, however, thought I was just spending the weekend with my dad. When I called to let her know I wouldn't be coming back because I had already moved into my dorm, she got really upset. I had mentioned the move-in date to her weeks ago, but I guess she either forgot or didn't think it was real. She assumed this was just a typical weekend trip. She told me it was hurtful that I excluded her from such a significant moment in my life, adding that as my mom, it's her job to be there for milestones like this. I didn't hold back when I replied. I reminded her that she's been letting her husband, Jack, exclude me from her life since the moment they started dating. Because it never seemed to bother her, I honestly didn't think it would matter if I didn't involve her in this part of my life either. At first, I felt justified saying this. It's what I've been feeling for years. But I could hear the hurt in her voice, and now I'm questioning myself. Maybe I was too harsh. Maybe I went too far. For so long, I felt like an outsider in my own family, and my mom never stepped in to defend or include me. Every time Jack or his family left me out, she didn't say, "This is my child too," or insist I be included in pictures or events. She chose to keep the peace with Jack, even though it hurt me. It felt like my relationship with her took a back seat, so she could keep harmony in her new family. Now, she's upset and acting like I'm the one who shut her out. But isn't this just the consequence of her own choices? I've tried to rationalize it. Maybe Jack's family never warmed up to me because I was older. Maybe it was just easier for my mom to keep things smooth with them instead of standing up for me. But honestly, how do you exclude a child, especially one as young as I was when all of this started? It doesn't make sense to me, and it feels cruel that they carried on like that for years. In hindsight, I realize my mom probably feels guilty. But I can't carry the burden of her guilt. I told her the date I'd be moving into my dorm multiple times. If being there was important to her, she would have remembered. She's dealing with the consequences of the choices she made long ago, and while I don't wish her pain, I also can't pretend it's all my fault. At the end of the day, I'm just trying to live my life and move forward. I'll always love my mom, but I've spent too long feeling like I don't belong in her world. Now, it's time to create a world of my own where I do belong. I felt conflicted about the anniversary of my nephew's passing. It was such a heavy and emotional day for my family. At the same time, I couldn't help feeling a little down about not being able to celebrate my birthday the way I used to. My girlfriend noticed this and wanted to do something to make me feel loved, even in a small way. That morning, I went to my sister Ashley's house to support her. She's still deeply grieving the loss of her son, and I wanted to be by her side. I stayed with her until almost lunchtime when my mom came to take over. We didn't want Ashley to be alone, but it wasn't possible for anyone to stay with her all day. After spending time with her, I went to work as usual. Later that evening, my girlfriend surprised me with something small and intimate at home, a candlelit dinner and a little cake. It was just the two of us, quiet and low-key. She wanted to acknowledge my birthday in a way that felt meaningful, but still respected the somber tone of the day. I didn't post anything on social media about it because I knew my family wasn't in the best place emotionally. However, my girlfriend shared a simple picture of us holding hands and the dinner she prepared, captioned with "Happy Birthday, Love." The next morning, I woke up to a storm of angry texts from my mom and Ashley. They were furious, accusing me of being heartless and insensitive for celebrating my birthday on such a sad day. They couldn't believe I would do something like that while my sister was in such a bad state. I explained it wasn't a big celebration and that the dinner was a surprise planned by my girlfriend, but they weren't willing to hear me out. They called me cold and said I should have refused to celebrate at all. What made it hurt even more was realizing that neither of them had remembered my birthday in the first place. No one in my family acknowledged it at all. I felt torn. On one hand, I understood the weight of the day for Ashley and the rest of my family. But on the other, I felt I had done my best to balance everything. I spent part of the day supporting my sister, worked, and then had a quiet, private moment with my girlfriend. It wasn't a wild party or anything extravagant. My girlfriend was thoughtful and respectful, and the small celebration meant a lot to me. I wonder if Ashley expects me to never celebrate my birthday again because of the timing. I sympathize with her pain, but is it fair for me to completely ignore my own life every year? Losing her child was devastating, and I've tried my best to support her, but I can't help feeling like this backlash over a small dinner is unreasonable. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, but it feels like I can't win. I wanted to respect my family's grief while still acknowledging something important to me. If I'm honest, I'm glad I celebrated in the way that I did, even if they don't see it that way. Of course, if I were in her position, I wouldn't expect to celebrate a birthday for at least a year or two after such a significant loss. However, I also wouldn't lash out at someone for having a small, personal celebration with their significant other. That reaction feels unfair. While I understand my mom is grieving her grandson, it's also her daughter's birthday. She can't let my special day be forgotten every single year, especially when birthdays have always been a big family tradition for everyone else. This reminds me of what happened at my wedding. I'm someone who loves paying attention to detail, and my husband and I meticulously planned every part of our big day. From the decorations to the outfits, everything was meant to follow a cohesive color scheme of pink and black. I wanted the wedding photos to look polished and harmonious, so I asked all of our close family members, including my parents and grandparents, to dress in colors that matched the theme. Everyone seemed on board when I explained my vision. My husband's grandparents even went shopping together to find matching outfits in the wedding colors, which I thought was so sweet. It made me happy to see how much effort they put in to be part of our special day. My mom and I went shopping with my own grandparents to help them pick out the perfect outfits. I also offered to go shopping with my mother-in-law to make sure she found something that matched the color scheme. She declined, saying she wanted to shop with her friends instead, and I trusted her to follow through. When she told my mom at the rehearsal dinner that she was wearing a long dress in the wedding colors, I assumed everything was fine. Fast forward to the wedding day. I was in the bridal suite getting ready when my mother-in-law walked in. My jaw dropped. She was wearing a royal purple ball gown that was completely outside the color scheme. On top of that, she had done her makeup in a way that felt completely over the top, neon blue eyeshadow and bright pink lipstick. Her husband, my father-in-law, was wearing a matching purple tie. It was so jarring that they stuck out like a sore thumb compared to everyone else. I was furious but decided to bite my tongue. I didn't want their choice of outfits to ruin my wedding day. Later, during the photos, my father-in-law asked me how he looked. I couldn't hold back and replied, "You and mother-in-law look like big, sore purple thumbs." He seemed confused and asked what I meant, so I explained that they knew about the dress code but still decided to wear something that made them stand out in every photo. He said he just wore what his wife picked out for him and promised to talk to her about it. My mother-in-law confronted me later that evening, asking what my problem was. I asked her why she lied about her outfit choice when she told my mom she was wearing something in the wedding colors. She admitted that she never bought a dress to match the color scheme. Instead, she chose the purple dress because it felt more true to her, and that's what mattered most. I tried to let it go and told her that it was fine. I'd just fixed the pictures in post-production to make everything cohesive. That's when she got upset. She told me I wasn't allowed to edit anything in the photos because they helped pay for the photography. According to her, any changes would be disrespectful and unacceptable. Her blatant disregard for our plans and her insistence on standing out at our wedding left me feeling hurt and disrespected. While I understand that she wanted to express herself, a wedding isn't just about one person's individuality. It's about celebrating the couple and their vision for the day. Her actions made it feel like she valued her preferences more than respecting us on our special day. During the wedding, after the confrontation with my mother-in-law, I made it clear that any pictures I personally post featuring her would be altered on my end. She and my father-in-law have no control over what I do with the photos I share. After saying my piece, I excused myself and focused on enjoying the rest of my wedding day, refusing to let her antics ruin the event. Unfortunately, my mother-in-law has a long history of making situations about herself. She loves to drop little comments like, "Well, I am the mother of the groom, so my opinion counts, or I can make decisions too. I'm the groom's mother, after all." She even tried to justify her interference by reminding us that they were contributing financially to the wedding. In reality, my parents paid for 80% of the wedding. My in-laws' contributions included covering the photographer and the rehearsal dinner. The photographer was a friend of theirs and only charged $1,000 for the entire night, while the rehearsal dinner cost $400 because they chose the most basic and inexpensive options possible. While we appreciated their help, their contributions didn't give them free rein to ignore our wishes or hijack the day. I've been questioning myself. Was I too harsh when I called out my mother-in-law and father-in-law? Did I cross a line by making it clear I'd alter photos to ensure they matched the vision for my wedding? Some might think I was being petty, but I truly don't believe I was wrong. These are my wedding photos, not hers. If their financial contribution came with strings attached, like trying to control how I manage my photos, they should have made that clear long before the wedding. The truth is, I think my mother-in-law planned this from the start. By choosing to pay for the photographer, she likely thought she could use that as leverage to do what she wanted and stand out in the photos. It wasn't just an innocent mistake. She chose her royal purple dress, over-the-top makeup, and flashy presents to intentionally draw attention to herself. Some might call it a bold move, but to me, it was selfish and completely out of line. Honestly, if she wanted to rebel against a color scheme, she could have gone with something like an all-black funeral-style outfit. At least that would have technically fit with the theme. But no, her goal was to stick out and ensure that everyone noticed her, regardless of how it made the rest of us feel. Now, I'm just trying to move forward. I plan to edit the photos as needed and make sure my wedding album reflects the day the way I envisioned it. I've even considered doing something funny, like editing one photo so everyone is dressed in purple and sending it to her as a joke. My husband and I might not hang a group photo with her in it over our bed, but we'll laugh at the ridiculousness of her antics whenever we look at those pictures. Of course, I'm aware that some might find this whole situation exhausting. Maybe they'd argue I should have let it go and not micromanaged the color scheme. But I don't think setting expectations for a once-in-a-lifetime event like your wedding makes you a control freak. Mother-in-law's actions were designed to provoke, and while I could have ignored her, she didn't just push boundaries, she stomped all over them. In the end, I've learned to pick my battles. My wedding day wasn't about her, and my focus is now on cherishing the good moments and the love I share with my husband. The drama will fade, but the memories we created, minus the purple dress drama, will last forever. I wanted to do something special for my niece Kimberly on her birthday. At first, I planned to get her a Chromebook because her old laptop had broken and I knew her mom, my sister Stephanie, couldn't afford to replace it. But then I thought about how much Kimberly loves gaming and how she's never really had the chance to own something like that. I decided it would be nice to spoil her for once since she rarely gets anything extravagant. So instead of a Chromebook, I bought her a gaming laptop as a birthday gift. Kimberly was thrilled, and it felt good to see her so happy. However, things took a sharp turn when my other sister, Angela, called me a few days later. She was furious and accused me of playing favorites. She said it wasn't fair that I gave Kimberly such an expensive gift while only giving her son Peter a pair of shoes for his birthday. Angela even pointed out that I spend more time with Kimberly than I do with her kids, Shirley and Peter. The thing is, it's not about favoritism, it's about circumstances. Kimberly comes from a struggling household. Stephanie is doing her best as a single mom but can't afford many extras for her daughter. Angela's family, on the other hand, is well off. Her kids have everything they need and more, but they're also a little spoiled. I find it easier and more enjoyable to spend time with Kimberly because she genuinely appreciates the attention, while Shirley and Peter tend to take things for granted. Over the past few days, Angela has taken this issue to our extended family and even aired her grievances on Facebook. She's been calling me names and making me out to be the bad guy for getting Kimberly a gaming laptop. According to her, I'm heartless and an idiot for treating the kids unequally. It's frustrating because I didn't intend to hurt anyone. I just wanted to do something nice for my niece who rarely gets a chance to have anything special. I understand where Angela is coming from in one sense. Kids don't look at situations like this with an adult perspective. They won't think about the financial struggles Kimberly's family faces compared to their own privileged lives. Instead, they'll see that their cousin got something amazing while they didn't, and that could hurt their feelings. I get that, but I also feel like Angela is missing the bigger picture here. If she's so concerned about fairness, why hasn't she stepped up to help Kimberly herself? She has the resources to do so, yet she's angry at me for doing what she hasn't. The way I see it, this isn't about favoritism. It's about recognizing need. Kimberly's life is different from her cousin's because her mom can't afford the luxuries that Angela's kids take for granted. I stepped in to give her something she wouldn't have otherwise, and I don't think that's wrong. Angela could easily do the same thing if she wanted to, but instead of helping, she's more focused on criticizing me. That said, I do recognize that kids often don't understand concepts like fairness or privilege. They just see one cousin getting more attention and a more expensive gift, and it can feel unfair to them. In hindsight, I probably should have handled things differently. Maybe I could have balanced things by giving Shirley and Peter something thoughtful too, even if it wasn't as big as the gaming laptop. I didn't mean to make anyone feel left out, but I also won't apologize for wanting to support my niece in a way that her mom can't. Angela's anger feels misplaced. Instead of getting upset with me, maybe she should think about how Kimberly feels when she sees her cousins always having nice things that she can't have. If Angela truly cared about fairness, she could help Kimberly too, instead of expecting me to fix everything. At the end of the day, my goal was to make Kimberly feel special and give her something she deserved but couldn't get on her own. I hope someday Angela and her kids can understand that it wasn't about playing favorites, it was about doing something kind for someone who needed it most. I'm a 32-year-old woman and part of a friend group that meets for dinner about twice a month. There are usually 7 to 9 of us, depending on everyone's schedules. We take turns choosing restaurants we want to try, and most of the time, we all have similar tastes. Last year, one of my friends, Linda, asked if her friend Jennifer could join us. Jennifer had just moved to our city, and Linda thought it would be a nice way for Jennifer to make friends and settle in without feeling too much pressure. Jennifer turned out to be really nice and funny, and she's now close friends with all of us. However, Jennifer has a pretty serious seafood allergy. Not just shellfish or fish, but all seafood. While it's not life-threatening, she does break out in hives. So far, this hasn't been a problem since we live in the North Dakota, where there aren't a lot of seafood restaurants. We tried a few before Jennifer moved here, but none were worth going back to. 2 months ago, a new sushi place opened up. My husband and I tried it, and it was amazing. Later, we went again on a double date with another friend and her husband, and they loved it too. When it was my turn to pick our group's next dinner spot, I suggested the sushi place. A few friends were excited to try it, but Linda reminded us about Jennifer's allergy and asked if I could pick somewhere else. Unfortunately, this sushi restaurant doesn't have many non-seafood options. They offer a few appetizers like dumplings and edamame, but nothing that would make a full meal for Jennifer. So, I changed my pick to another restaurant that everyone, including Jennifer, could enjoy. The next week, I asked the friends who were interested in the sushi place if they wanted to go there with me outside of our regular group dinners. They agreed, and a small group of us went. It wasn't part of our normal dinner schedule, just a casual outing. But somehow, word got around that we'd gone to the sushi place without inviting everyone. Linda, Jennifer, and another friend were upset. They felt like we were purposely excluding people. From my perspective, though, this isn't middle school. We're allowed to hang out in smaller groups outside of our full group dinners. Since Jennifer has a seafood allergy, it wouldn't make sense for her to attend a meal at a sushi restaurant anyway. Our regular group dinners are still happening, but this was a one-time thing with a smaller group. I tried to explain that it wasn't about excluding anyone, especially not Jennifer. It's just that sometimes smaller groups form for specific outings like this one. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone, I just wanted to enjoy a meal at a restaurant I love with friends who could eat there. I could have insisted on going to the sushi place with the whole group from the start, but I didn't. I changed my choice to accommodate Jennifer's seafood allergy. Later, I went to the sushi place with a few friends who wanted to try it. Now Linda and Jennifer are upset, saying I went behind their backs and created division in the group. It's turned into a big mess, with people taking sides and pointing fingers. In my opinion, I'm not in the wrong. I picked a different restaurant for our main group dinner so everyone, including Jennifer, could enjoy it. The sushi outing wasn't part of the group's scheduled dinners. It was just a casual meal with a few friends who were interested. They can't expect me to completely avoid seafood forever just because one person in the group has an allergy. Linda seems more like Jennifer's mom than her friend in this situation. Jennifer is an adult and can decide for herself if she wants to join or sit out when we choose a seafood restaurant. That said, I also understand why Linda wanted to stand up for Jennifer. Jennifer is new to the city, and Linda invited her to join our dinner group to help her make friends. It's nice of Linda to look out for her and make sure Jennifer doesn't feel like a burden to a group of people she doesn't know very well. But this whole situation has blown out of proportion. It's ridiculous that people are upset just because a few of us wanted sushi and went to get it without the entire group. As I said before, this is a middle school. Friends are allowed to do things in smaller groups outside of the main group without it being a big deal. There was no intention to exclude anyone or cause drama. It was just a simple meal with friends.
Hey, what's the point of bringing her food at home when she's going to be that kind of wife? Maybe you should just leave. My mother-in-law's harsh words shocked me. Her cold, sharp eyes were fixed on me with intensity. Kristen has us, and we do not need you anymore. You still look tired, and you don't seem to do anything, my unhelpful sister-in-law remarked. Miss, this is too much, Kristen. Don't you think your mother and sister are going overboard? I pleaded. I'm doing my best, To. When I sought help from my husband, he responded with a demeaning attitude. I agree with my mother and sister, Kristen interjected. I'm busy with work, and it's becoming a problem if you don't help with the chores. Besides, my relationship with the new part-time girl is progressing, and you're just baggage. Can you quickly pack and live somewhere else? Shocked by Kristen's words, I glanced at the three of them. They all seemed to blame me. A surge of rage welled up in my chest. I took a deep breath, calmed myself, and said, I understand. I need some time. My in-laws, who had once relied on me, were now falling apart. My name is Nova, and I'm 32 years old. I work diligently, both at my job and in household chores. While it's not uncommon for women to continue working after marriage, I truly love my job and strive to succeed in the company I joined right after college. One morning, as I was getting ready for work, my husband, Kristen, approached with a pleading look. Nova, can you take care of this? He handed me a file crammed with receipts and bills. You should manage the cafe's finances properly, he said. I smiled and responded, Sorry, but I'm really bad at that. I met Kristen while he was working part-time at a cafe I frequented. After a few chats, we began dating and eventually talked about marriage. Now, Kristen owns the cafe, but despite his ability to run the business, he struggles with paperwork and always asks me to handle the accounting. As I sighed, my mother-in-law added, Nova, I suddenly feel like eating Chinese food tonight. Could you rinse the rice well? Also, Mia and the kids are coming this weekend, so we need to plan their meals. Sure, I got it. I nodded to my mother-in-law's request and hurriedly left the house. Before marriage, I was excited about my new life with Kristen. However, he suggested, My mom's lonely by herself. Why don't we all live together in our big house? So now I reside with his mother. To put it lightly, she's not proficient in household chores. When we moved in, the house was a bit of a mess. After my father-in-law passed away, she started living on a pension, which she mostly spent on dining out or ordering food. Kristen seems to believe that housework is a woman's job, making it my full responsibility. Kristen's sister, Mia, occasionally brings her kids home, and each time she does, my to-do list grows. I can't help but think that yet another chaotic weekend is approaching. Weekends, which should be precious times for recovering from the usual exhaustion, turn into moments when my sister-in-law's children ask to play or complain about being hungry. Then my sister-in-law drops a bombshell. Nova, I'm getting divorced, and we'll be moving back here with the kids next month. I'm surprised, and for a moment I'm lost for words. Really? Do you have something to say? She asks. No, I was just thinking it must have been hard. When are you moving? I hope that maybe she will help, and household chores will become more manageable. While we had a normal relationship, I anticipate that this change might bring us closer and result in her contributing to the chores. Despite my positive attitude, reality has other plans. Perhaps because she grew up with my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law appears to live a life devoid of housework. She spends most of her time lounging on the sofa watching TV and always has some snacks with her. Observing her, I realized her neglect of housework might have contributed to her divorce. Now, with the added responsibility of preparing meals for her children and making lunches for kindergarten, my workload has increased and my free time has diminished. I had hoped for her assistance, but it's disappointing that it turned out to be a swing and a miss. Then, there comes a time when my work at the company suddenly becomes hectic. Every day I start work early, do overtime, and return home exhausted to find the room overflowing with things, with no space to even walk. Seeing this scene each day, waves of fatigue wash over me. On top of that, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law complain, asking if dinner is ready yet or why I'm home late. When I struggle to manage household chores, they coldly remark, Nova, there's a mountain of laundry waiting. Don't slack off just because you're busy. Before my sister-in-law can say anything, I frequently opt to keep my thoughts to myself. Nova, are you standing up to your mother-in-law? That's a bit bold, but for the sake of the children, please try a little harder to make homemade meals, suggested my sister-in-law. I couldn't help but respond, if you have so much free time at home, why don't you help out once in a while? While doing household chores, I overheard Kristen's sister saying, Haha, Kristen owns a store, so Nova doesn't need to work, right? If that's the case, maybe you should try a little harder at home. Behind their words, I felt the mounting pressure that I should be doing more. That night, at the peak of my stress, I decided to speak my mind to Kristen. I've been so busy lately, and neither your mother nor your sister is helping out with household chores. It's really hard. Nova, you're not speaking ill of our family, are you? Kristen's eyes sharpened a bit, and I braced myself. That's not what I mean, but it's hard for me to do everything by myself. If you helped out once in a while, things would be a little easier for me. I'm busy managing the store. It's different from a regular job. Housework is the wife's responsibility, right? Even though I was disappointed by his response, I sat and pondered. A good idea suddenly popped into my head, and I silently pumped my fist. I immediately grabbed my smartphone, opened my favorite online shop, and started adding the necessary items to the cart. After completing the purchase, I went to bed satisfied. A few days later, my new electronic household appliances, which would become my lifelines, were delivered to our home: the latest washing machine, a cleaning robot that reaches every corner of the room, and a rice cooker that cooks delicious rice without much effort. Each of them was a savior, making my daily life just a little bit easier and more enjoyable. While setting up the new washing machine, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law suddenly appeared with surprised expressions. "Hey, Nova, you got such a fancy washing machine. But the old one was still good, wasn't it?" Smiling gently, I replied, "The old one took a bit too long, and I heard this new one shortens the laundry time." Their gaze then shifted to the cleaning robot and the new kitchen appliances. "See, I've also upgraded these," I said, showing them off a bit. All these things, cleaning robots and convenient cooking appliances, my mother-in-law said inside the room. Seeing the slightly surprised expressions of my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, I smirked to myself. Kristen sat next to me, and the four of us began our discussion. "Why did you buy so many things?" My mother-in-law raised her voice. "Do you need all these new appliances? Isn't it just because you want to make things a bit easier?" She continued. "Well, I thought it would be nice if things around the house could run a bit more smoothly," I replied with a slightly troubled expression. But my mother-in-law chimed in, "Relying too much on machines, aren't we?" My sister-in-law waved her hand, but I responded, "The appliances we had can still be used. Kristen is working hard managing his store. Maybe you should be more frugal." Kristen nodded in agreement with his sister, and in a quiet voice, I murmured, "Maybe you're right." There was a hint of anger in my mother-in-law's eyes, and I stumbled over my words. "Are you even considering our household?" "I am, but I'm just a bit exhausted," I replied. My mother-in-law raised her voice, exclaiming, "Enough! I can't believe you're our daughter-in-law." My sister-in-law, with a disgusted look, added, "I'll watch over Kristen. We don't need someone like you here." When I looked at Kristen, he said coldly, "I understand what Mom and Sis are saying. It's a bit difficult to have a wife who doesn't do housework." Looking at Kristen's face, my heart felt heavy. He continued with a cold smile, "I have my store, so I decide how to use my money. But being with someone who spends on anything and everything might be difficult." I was shaken by his words, but I looked into Kristen's eyes and counted to 10. He added with a hint of cruelty, "Also, I've noticed things have been going well with that new part-time girl. She's more attractive than you are. Now maybe it's time for you to pack up and find a new place to live." A fire of anger surged within me, though I didn't voice it. Taking a step back and calming myself, I replied after a deep breath, "All right, I'll look for a new home." "Finally, you understand. I'll feel much better without you around," he said smugly. Kristen signed the divorce papers at night, and I moved to a nearby weekly rental apartment with just the bare essentials. In the divorce paper, no one tried to stop me. When I left, did they ever really care about me? After submitting the divorce papers at the city office, I found a stylish apartment to start fresh. During this time, an unexpected opportunity came my way, a promotion I had been putting off because of my family situation. I seized this chance and began working as a section manager. Every day, as I dedicated myself entirely to my job, I felt a renewed sense of accomplishment. During these busy days, my phone rang. The caller ID showed it was my former mother-in-law. I thought we had nothing to do with each other anymore, right? Without checking her message, I swiped to dismiss the call. A year flew by. One weekend, as I was relaxing in my room, listening to my favorite music, my phone rang again. To my surprise, it was my former mother-in-law. Wondering what she wanted after all this time, I picked up. "Hello? Is something wrong?" "Nova." I finally got through. I didn't think you would answer after so many calls. "Well, it's been a while. What's going on?" I asked. She hesitated for a moment and then asked, "How's your new life?" Despite her probing tone, I replied cheerfully, "It's great. I love my new apartment and work is going smoothly. I even got promoted and am living freely." "That's good, Nova. Can you come back home?" I was taken aback and blurted out, "Why?" "We're struggling financially," I thought to myself. I knew it, and I responded cautiously, "Kristen's cafe only makes about $1,000 a month, right? If no one else in the family works, things could be tough. You know about that?" she asked. Yes, Kristen's cafe wasn't doing well. I was fully aware of its financial situation since I handled all the accounting, but he pretended to be the successful owner without understanding the real state of his business. It was almost laughable how oblivious he was. I handled all the finances and procurement, so of course I sensed it. Her shock was palpable. "You knew and you didn't tell us. We had no idea you were doing so well in such a big company or that you were contributing so much to the household expenses," my former mother-in-law exclaimed. "I contributed more than $3,000 every month. Thanks to that, you all managed." The truth was, I used my salary to bridge the gap in Kristen's business losses. He seemed completely unaware of the situation, and after I left, it seemed reality hit hard. "Nova, can you please come back?" she asked. Curious, I inquired, "So how's Kristen's cafe doing now?" She sighed. "We might have to close soon, and the part-time workers keep quitting." With an inward smirk, I commented on his slightly sloppy management style. "It's hard to keep it going for long, isn't it? His little bit of pride doesn't help, not doing proper work. I mean, how many women out there do you think would be willing to support a guy like that?" My former mother-in-law was momentarily at a loss for words. I continued, somewhat sarcastically, "Wait, I'm a bit busy now. Since you left, the house is a mess. It's chaotic with things everywhere. It looks like a storeroom without anyone to cook. You were eating out, which was costing a lot. The washing machine broke down, and it seemed like there was no room in the budget to buy a new one. The appliances that you took back, I was relying on them," my former mother-in-law admitted. Puzzled, I asked, "How? Why is that?" "Those were for my convenience. Besides, I bought them myself, so it's okay for me to take them back, right?" She reluctantly agreed. "Yeah, I guess so, but I never realized housework was this challenging." With a firm tone, my former mother-in-law added, "With 3 adults in the house, how can it be that hard? What are Kristen and your daughter doing?" A hint of fatigue could be heard in her voice. As for Kristen, his staff members have been quitting and sales have plummeted. As soon as he found out, he became downcast and had just been lazing around at home. But Kristen used to spend his money from the store without any restraint, right? On top of that, Mia doesn't help at all. She doesn't do anything around the house and even gets her allowance from me. To be honest, living on just my pension for the 3 of us is hard," she continued. I responded with a hint of sarcasm. Mia once told me that I was unnecessary because she was there." My former mother-in-law desperately said, "Nova, we're really in trouble. Living on just my pension for the 3 of us is quite tough." I firmly stated, "I have no intention of returning to that house." It must be hard living with all that baggage. She seemed to be at a loss for words. Seeing her like this made me feel a bit sorry for her, but as I was about to hang up, my former mother-in-law seemed eager to say something. "Nova, I'm sorry. Can you reconsider?" Her voice sounded a bit exhausted. I replied, I wonder if we can ever spend days together with smiles again, huh? Was it that hard without me? I asked with a mix of surprise and calmness. After a short pause, my former mother-in-law took a deep breath. Yes, there's an issue with the property tax. We might have to let go of the house. I said but I don't want to get involved anymore. Decide what you're going to do with your family. I hung up without waiting for her next words. After that, I set it up so I wouldn't receive any more calls from her. In my room, holding my favorite mug filled with aromatic coffee, I enjoyed my time alone looking at the outside scenery. A smile spontaneously appeared on my face. A few months later, when I passed by the cafe where Kristen used to work, I noticed the place was now quiet and empty. Recalling its past liveliness, I felt a bit nostalgic. While walking around the old town, I became curious about my former in-laws' house and saw a sold sign. Coincidentally, I bumped into an old neighbor in town. According to her, those three had quickly sold their house and moved to a small apartment nearby. In their new home, there were always loud arguments and even the smell of garbage. It seems the neighbors are quite bothered, and it has become a bit of local gossip. I thought it must be tough for them, but with a bit of effort, life can change. I wondered as I gazed at the old house. These thoughts wandered in my mind. A lot has happened to me since then, but I'm living each day to the fullest. A handsome guy from my workplace confessed, saying, "I admire your hardworking nature." Now we're enjoying our dates, and I'm looking forward to what the future holds. If I get married again, I want to be happy. I'm feeling very excited about it now. Thanks for watching. How did you find the story? Let me know in the comments below. Remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more awesome stories like this. Your feedback and support mean a lot.
I only focus on my small business at home and don't do much of the house chores. That's why my mother-in-law started making mean comments again. My name's Susan, and I'm 32 years old. I design websites and work from home. I live with my husband John and his mom in the house where John grew up. Before I got married, I had a job at a company. But after getting married, I decided to work for myself as a web designer from home. Most of my work comes from people who know me from my old job. They liked my work, so they keep giving me projects. It's a good deal for both of us. I don't have to spend time commuting, and I can focus on my household responsibilities. My old boss and I are both happy with how things are going. My mother-in-law doesn't like that I work from home. She thinks a wife should focus on taking care of the house and supporting her husband, like in the old days. But times have changed, and many couples both work now. My husband John tries to explain this to her, but she still insists that I should do more housework since I earn the money. She doesn't really understand my job and keeps calling it a home business. Even though I try to balance my work and chores, she's still not happy. Maybe she sees me as the woman who took her son away from her. Since we got married, she's been making sarcastic comments about me and seems to dislike everything I do. John says she relies on him more since his dad passed away about 5 years ago. It annoys him sometimes, but he also seems to like feeling needed by his mom. Our house in a neighborhood was bought by John's dad 30 years ago. His life insurance paid off the rest of the mortgage, so now it's in his mom's name. It's just right for the three of us, and there's a room for me to work, which is great. My mother-in-law has lived here for 30 years and has lots of friends nearby who visit often. When they come, I have to stop working to serve them tea and snacks. And when they get together, they always talk about their daughters-in-law. One says her daughter-in-law runs to her parents' house over small problems and is hardly home. Another says her daughter-in-law spends too much money, causing problems for her son. I hear these conversations from my workspace and can't help but laugh. They seem to compete over who has the worst daughter-in-law, never saying anything good about them. When one friend praises me for managing work and house chores, my mother-in-law doesn't seem happy. She dismisses my work as just a small business and wonders how much I make. Then another friend talks about how her wife spends her part-time job money on herself, while her husband's money is for everyone. They all laugh. My mother-in-law starts talking about how things were different in her day, but I tune her out with my headphones. I've heard these stories before, and they often disrespect modern wives. I focus on my work and block out the noise. One evening at dinner, John casually mentioned wanting to buy a new car. "I've been thinking about getting a new car. Is that okay?" he asked. My mother-in-law snapped back, wondering why he needed my permission. John quickly tried to calm her down, saying it would be a car for all of us, so he couldn't decide on his own. Despite John's explanation, my mother-in-law kept arguing with him. "Since you're the only one with a driver's license, you should choose the car you want," she insisted. Poor John, who usually listens to his mother, looked at me for help. "You decide," he said, feeling stuck. Frustrated, I told him, "Fine. Don't keep asking for your wife's opinion, just make the decision yourself." John always checks with either me or his mother about everything. It's nice that he's considerate, but sometimes it's frustrating how unsure he can be. His dad, my father-in-law, used to make decisions on his own, and my mother-in-law often complained about it. Growing up seeing this, John thinks it's wrong to be too assertive. But my mother-in-law, who had a controlling husband, believes that's how a husband should be. My mother-in-law's dissatisfaction with John always seeking approval falls on me. She blames me, saying, "Susan is always nagging John. That's why he's like this." I was surprised and didn't know how to respond. John chimed in, blaming me too, saying, "Yeah, Susan is always complaining. That's why I can't decide on my own." I tried to defend myself, but it didn't help. John always takes his mother's side. We've been married for 2 years, but he's never stood up for me in front of her. He apologizes later, saying I'm the most important to him, but I'm losing trust. He seemed caring at first, but he never backs me up. I'm starting to question our relationship. Kindness and indecisiveness are different. I wish he'd stand up to his mother. About a month later, John's new car arrived. The smell of a new car is the best. "Let's all go for a drive on my next day off," he said happily. His excitement spread, even to my mother-in-law. She commented on the car's cost, hinting it was paid from John's salary. Ignoring her, John enjoyed exploring the car. I was shocked at its expense. "There's a limit, even though I said he could choose," I thought. John came inside, still thrilled. I asked, "How much did it cost?" He casually replied, $60,000. Seeing my reaction, he asked, "But you said I could get any car, right?" My mother-in-law quickly sided with my husband, saying, "You let John decide, so don't complain now." While I did leave the decision to him, I also hoped he'd consider our finances. Ignoring her, I asked my husband, "Where's the money coming from?" He hesitated, then admitted he was paying with a loan. Instead of addressing this, my mother-in-law shouted, "Susan, don't complain, you're not the one paying." I wasn't sure if she was mad because I ignored her, or because of what I said to my husband, but she gave me a fierce glare. "You're always complaining, even though you're living off John's salary," she said harshly. I defended myself, saying I have a job too. But my mother-in-law dismissed it, saying I didn't earn much with my part-time job compared to John's $5,000 a month. I was about to explain that was my salary, but when I looked for my husband, he had disappeared. I couldn't take it anymore. My mother-in-law even went as far as saying she wanted a daughter-in-law like me to leave soon. I had been patient, but I was done. Discussing my salary seemed ridiculous, and I didn't care anymore. Feeling frustrated with my mother-in-law's comments and my husband's attitude, I couldn't understand why he caused this argument in the first place. His usual indecisiveness had sparked it all over again. "Okay, I'll leave then," I said, heading to my home office. I grabbed my laptop and essentials and left the house, telling my mother-in-law I'd come back for the rest of my stuff later. She glared at me with a frightening expression, while my husband stayed in his room. As I left, my still angry mother-in-law shouted, "Make sure you've signed the divorce papers next time you come here." Did you hear me? It shocked me to hear her use such harsh language for the first time. Ignoring her, I stormed out of my in-laws' house. I wasn't sure if she was angry because I said I would leave as she asked, or because I confronted my husband about the money. Regardless, I knew I wanted to leave that house as soon as possible. After storming out of my husband's parents' house, I went back to my own parents' house for the time being. My mom was surprised and asked what happened suddenly. My dad, seeing my unusual expression, seemed to understand the situation. I don't know what happened, but you can stay here as long as you need to, he assured me. I didn't hear from my husband afterward. The man who used to cherish me before our marriage was nowhere to be found. I couldn't help but feel foolish for not seeing that he only listened to his mother. Talking to my parents about what happened at my husband's house helped calm me down. You don't have children, so it's better to divorce sooner rather than later, my mom advised, and I agreed. On the weekend, my father helped me move my belongings out of my husband's house. My husband was nowhere to be found, and my mother-in-law stayed in her room. Standing outside my husband's room, I called out, "Thank you for everything. Could you sign the divorce papers?" I slid the papers under the door. I signed. "Is this okay?" came my husband's curt voice from behind the door, along with the signed papers. It saddened me that our marriage had come to this. Without saying anything to my mother-in-law, I left my husband's house. I had lived there for about 2 years, but there weren't many good memories. I headed straight to the city hall and submitted the divorce papers. I wanted to settle everything quickly if possible. After the divorce, I stayed at my parents' house and continued working there. I thought about renting a room and living alone, but my mom insisted I stay with them for safety reasons. My dad agreed, worried about John and his mom possibly causing trouble. Though I didn't think they would, I felt more comfortable being with my parents. Luckily, I could work from anywhere, so I decided to stay home for a while. About 2 months passed, and I had almost forgotten about my ex-husband and ex-mother-in-law when I started getting calls from an unknown number. At first, I thought it might be a wrong number, so I didn't answer. But the calls kept coming. Reluctantly, I listened to my ex-husband's voice on the phone. "Why didn't you answer sooner?" He sounded flustered. "It's an unknown number, and besides, we're not connected anymore, so I was going to hang up." I replied, ready to end the call. But then he rushed to say, wait, I can't get my smartphone to work." "Why is that?" He sounded desperate. "I'm not sure. You should contact your phone company," I suggested. Then something dawned on me. "Did you not deposit money into your bank account when we were married?" I used to deposit money from my salary for public utilities. His salary went into the same account, but it was usually a small amount. He sold health food products, but his income was low because of the commission system. Some people made good money with lots of orders, but he didn't do as well. He mostly received the basic salary, so only a few $100s went into the account. I had been depositing money into the payment account every month, but for the past 3 months, it was only his salary. The argument about the car and me leaving the house happened in the middle of the month. That meant the payment for the new car might have already started. My ex-husband fell silent on the other end of the phone. "I've been managing everything with my own salary. From now on, you'll have to figure it out on your own," I informed him. I wanted to say Sergio, but I held back and hung up the phone. My ex-husband probably never told his mother how much he earned. She didn't realize that most of our expenses were covered by my salary since our marriage. John must have felt embarrassed to admit he earned less than his wife. I later learned that utilities like electricity and water are not easily shut off. The first thing to go is usually cell phone service. A few days later, on a quiet weekend morning, the doorbell at my house rang loudly. My dad answered and started arguing with someone at the front door. Seeing my usually calm father so angry, I knew something was wrong. My mom and I went to see what was happening. "We have nothing to do with you anymore, so leave," my dad said firmly. My heart raced when I heard my ex-mother-in-law's voice demanding to see me. Just as my dad had predicted, she had come all the way to our home. When she saw me, my ex-mother-in-law started yelling at me with a terrifying expression on her face. "Because you stopped depositing money into the account, the electricity and water got cut off." My parents and I were shocked. What did she mean by that? Just then, my ex-husband arrived, desperately trying to intervene. "Mom, stop it. This has nothing to do with Susan." But my ex-mother-in-law ignored John's attempts and kept yelling. "John makes $5,000. Why would the electricity and water get cut off? You're mistaken. I'm the one who makes $5,000. I corrected her, finally able to speak up about what I hadn't been able to before. My ex-mother-in-law looked surprised at my words, then turned to John. "That's right, it wasn't my salary, it was all Susan's," he admitted, looking defeated. "How can you earn so much with a part-time job?" My ex-mother-in-law looked at me as if I had tricked her. I've told you before, it's not a part-time job. It's a real job. I replied firmly. My ex-mother-in-law's face paled. How much does John make? She asked, her voice barely audible. About $500 net, he answered quietly. There was a moment of silence, then my ex-mother-in-law said something unbelievable. Susan, can't you come back? The whole Weavas thing was a joke, she pleaded, her tone low and submissive. It reminded me of someone trying to butter me up. What are you talking about? I'm divorced. I have nothing to do with you two anymore. I declined firmly, but my ex-mother-in-law continued to plead with me in a familiar, overly familiar way. You can just remarry John. If we start the paperwork now, it'll be fine. My dad intervened when I was too shocked to respond. We're done with you. If you don't leave right now, we'll call the police, he warned, his voice firm. My ex-husband and ex-mother-in-law hurriedly left at the sound of my dad's intimidating tone. If you show up again, I'm calling the cops right away, my father warned them as they left. What a bunch of uncouth people, my mother remarked, astonished. My father seemed even more furious. I'm glad you got out of that marriage, Susan. Later on, I heard updates about my ex-family from one of John's friends. John ended up selling his family home and land, moving into an apartment with his mother. He sold the new car too, using the proceeds to pay off remaining debts. However, instead of settling down, John wasted all his money on gambling. He vanished without a trace, leaving his mother behind, who developed dementia and had to be placed in a care facility. Meanwhile, I focused on my job and started living alone. Recently, I've begun dating a man I met through work. He's understanding about my divorce and is committed to his job. He's nothing like John, who relied on his wife's money for expensive purchases. Though we're not engaged yet, we both feel a strong connection and can see a future together.
Hi, I'm Leora, a 43-year-old mom to my daughter Marigold, who just turned 15 this year. Marigold has been working really hard in school lately, aiming to get into a good middle school in a couple of years. These days, life has felt pretty calm, which is a nice change, especially after the struggles I went through about 10 years ago. Back then, I was working my first job as a tax accountant, and I met Soren, who was in charge of accounting at the same company. I was 29, and he was 31 when we decided to get married. Soren was living with his mother since his father had passed away a few years earlier. Before we got married, I asked him if we would be living with his mother. Soren assured me, no, she wants to live comfortably on her own. I felt relieved because I didn't really want to live with my mother-in-law. I was fine with living nearby in case she needed help, but I valued having our own space and privacy. Things seemed to be going smoothly until about a month after our wedding, when my mother-in-law started coming over to our place more and more often. It all began innocently enough with her offering to bring over some crab from a relative. She said, "I'll bring it over, so we can have a crab dinner together tonight." She was so enthusiastic that it was hard to say no. She also loved to drink, so she asked us to have whiskey, wine, and beer ready for her. I thought it was just a one-time thing, a simple family dinner, but I was wrong. That night, she ate and drank for over 3 hours, eventually passing out on our couch. When she finally went home, I thought that would be the end of it, but the next morning, she started calling again, looking for reasons to drop by. Her visits quickly became frequent, and she got bolder each time. For instance, she would call in the evening and ask, "Leora, have you decided on dinner yet?" If I said I was just about to start cooking, she'd say, "Well, I just got home from spending the day out with friends, and I'm starving. Can I come over for dinners?" I would try to tell her that I'd only bought enough for 2, but she'd insist, "No problem. I don't eat that much. Just share a bit with me." From then on, she would show up nearly every evening, always seeming to know exactly when I was starting to cook. She'd stay late, sometimes even spending the night. This became a regular thing, and I was losing my patience. I eventually asked Soren if he could talk to her and ask her to give us a bit more space. He brushed it off, saying, "She just wants to get along with you. Isn't that a good thing?" I reminded him that she'd promised to respect our privacy, and he agreed to speak to her politely. But nothing changed. The calls kept coming, and her visits continued. I finally realized that if I didn't set some boundaries, she would just keep taking advantage. Soren wasn't much help, so I decided to handle it myself. One day, when she called to ask if she could come over for dinner again, I said, "Actually, that won't work today. Soren and I were planning to come over to your place instead." She hesitated and said, "That's no good. Even if you come over, I won't be able to serve you anything special." I replied, "Oh, we don't mind at all. It would be nice to have a meal that you cooked." She then snapped back, "You're asking me to cook for you? Do you think that's fair?" I stood firm and replied, "Please, don't come over today." And so I finally set some limits. After that, things became a bit more manageable, and eventually, she stopped coming over unannounced. Looking back, I'm proud of myself for standing up for the peace in our home, I said. "Remember how we agreed to keep a respectful distance while maintaining a good relationship? In that case, please refrain from coming to our house from now on as well." I worried I might have been too direct, but I knew that if I didn't make my point clear, her intrusiveness would only get worse. After I set that boundary, my mother-in-law stayed away for a while, and life settled down. A few months later, I found out I was pregnant. When I reached my 9th month, I took maternity leave and moved back to my parents' house to prepare for the baby. With my mom's help, I was able to relax and enjoy those last few weeks of peace. Then, a week before my due date, I delivered a healthy baby girl. We named her Marigold. The day after Marigold was born, my mother-in-law showed up at the hospital, surprising me with a list of 10 baby names she had carefully written out. "I've come up with some good names for the baby," she said proudly, handing me the list. "Mom, thank you for thinking of us, but we've already chosen her name," I replied gently, hoping she would understand. Soren, who was there with us, seemed caught off guard and asked, "Why would you pick a name without consulting me? This is my granddaughter too. I should have a say in naming her." I stayed firm and said, "Please stop. We've already decided. The paperwork hasn't been filed yet, but we're set on her name." My mother-in-law wouldn't let it go. "There's still time to change it. Just say the word, and I'll handle it." At that moment, my mother, who had been quietly observing, finally stepped in. She said in a calm but firm voice, "Marigold is Soren and Leora's child. It's their right to name her. Grandparents don't get to decide these things." "But I was so looking forward to helping choose her name," my mother-in-law argued, sounding hurt. Understanding where she was coming from but staying firm, my mom replied, "Soren and Leora have been looking forward to this more than anyone else. As a parent yourself, you should understand." Clearly taken aback, my mother-in-law glared at my mom before leaving the room. Soren quickly followed her to calm her down. Turning to my mom, I thanked her. "Thanks for standing up for us. I feel so much better now that this is finally clear." "I know dealing with her must be tough," my mom replied gently. "But at least you'll get to rest here for a month, right?" "Yes, I'm planning to stay for about a month to fully recover," I assured her. "Good. Make sure you get plenty of rest," she said with a smile. But on the day I was supposed to leave the hospital, Soren and my mother-in-law arrived to pick me up. She announced with a bright smile, "Everything's ready to welcome Marigold. Let's go home, Leora." "Wait a minute," I replied, surprised. I thought I'd mentioned that I was planning to recover at my parents' house for the first month. Looking somewhat irritated, she asked, "Is your parents' place really the best environment for you and Marigold right now? Soren has been eagerly waiting for you both to come home." My mother stepped in and said, "Leora is still recovering, and I'm here to take good care of her and the baby. I live nearby, so she's in good hands. There's no rush." But my mother-in-law wouldn't let it go. "Now, Leora, hurry up and get ready. I'm not leaving until you're packed." Soren, who had been awkwardly silent, finally spoke up. "I want Leora and Marigold home too, but she's still recovering and needs help with the housework." He glanced at his mom, adding, "We'll manage," and Mom said she'd help us out for a while. But my mother-in-law didn't give up. She said, "Leora, You've already relied on your mother so much during the pregnancy. Don't you think it's selfish to burden her even more? At that point, I felt stuck. My mom had told me not to worry, but I knew that if I insisted on staying with my parents, my mother-in-law might hold a grudge and make things even harder for us later. So, to avoid more tension, I decided to go back to my own home instead. However, I quickly realized I might have made the wrong choice. The very next day, my mother-in-law showed up as if she'd been waiting for her chance. "Marigold, Grandma's going to hold you now," she said, reaching for the baby. "Please don't wake her. She just fell asleep," I whispered, trying to keep the peace. "Oh, it's fine," she replied, brushing off my concerns as she cradled Marigold in her arms. That was only the beginning of the challenges to come. "I raised Soren, you know," my mother-in-law said proudly as she lifted Marigold out of her crib. But as soon as she picked her up, Marigold began wailing loudly. No matter what my mother-in-law tried, the crying wouldn't stop. She sighed and muttered, "Isn't this child a bit high-strung? That's why I asked you not to wake her," I replied, gently but firmly. She huffed and said, "I came over to help, and now you're being harsh with me." I quickly took Marigold back, doing my best to calm her. Once she settled down, I said, "If you're here to help, maybe you could do some shopping and prepare meals. I'm really not able to go out yet."
She frowned.
"Cooking isn't really my thing," she replied. "I'd rather help with childcare." "I can handle Marigold," I told her. "But if you could manage the other chores, that would be a huge help." "Oh, Leora," she said with a chuckle, "do you plan to monopolize Marigold? I came here to take care of her while you do the housework. If that's the case, could you put her to sleep now?" I asked. My mother-in-law looked at Marigold, who was fussing again, and said, "Do you think she's hungry?" "I just fed her," I answered. "Then her diaper must be wet." "Go on and change it," she suggested. "I already did," I replied, starting to feel frustrated. She shrugged. "Well, if that's the case, there's nothing more I can do," she said, giving up. "I'll come check on you again tomorrow." And with that, she left. As she walked out, I muttered to myself, "Please don't come back. Ever." But that wish didn't come true. From then on, she started visiting nearly every day. Instead of helping, she'd often wake Marigold up from her naps, leaving her fussy and in a bad mood. She would eat whatever meals I managed to prepare, then leave without so much as rinsing a dish. Soren, who I had hoped would support me, would just come home from work, smile at Marigold, and say, "She's so cute," without offering any real help. When I asked him to pitch in, he'd do a half-hearted job that left me with more work to clean up afterward. Exhausted and sleep-deprived, I was at my breaking point. About a month after Marigold was born, Soren actually got up early one morning and said, "I'll watch Marigold, so you can get some rest." "You must be tired." "Are you sure?" I asked, grateful but a bit wary. "Will you be okay on your own?" "My mom's coming over soon, so it'll be fine," he reassured me. Hoping for the best, I went back to bed. About an hour later, though, I heard Marigold crying. I tried to ignore it, thinking Soren or my mother-in-law would soothe her. But as the cries grew louder, I couldn't stay in bed anymore. I got up and hurried to Marigold's room. Soren was nowhere in sight. My mother-in-law stood by the crib, looking irritated, while Marigold cried her heart out. "Where's Soren?" I asked, confused. "He left," she replied flatly. "He got a call from a friend or something." "And what are you doing?" I demanded. "Marigold won't stop crying," she complained. "Did you check her diaper?" "Are you asking me to do that?" she replied, annoyed. "It's been ages since I changed a diaper. Now that you're here, hurry up and take care of it." Feeling more frustrated with myself than anyone else, I quickly changed Marigold's diaper, and she started to calm down in my arms. Just as she drifted off, my mother-in-law said, "Oh, she's in a better mood now. Hand her over," and took Marigold from me. Resigned, I went to the kitchen to clean up the dishes that Soren and his mom had probably used. But before I could finish, I heard Marigold fussing again. My mother-in-law was desperately trying to soothe her, saying, "It's Grandma, Marigold. It's Grandma." But the more she rocked Marigold, the louder the baby cried. I tried to step in to calm Marigold, but then something shocking happened. My mother-in-law, clearly frustrated, looked at Marigold and snapped, "Why are you always crying? Your night crying is annoying too. Just shut up." And then, in a burst of anger, she actually smacked Marigold on the head. I gasped, horrified. "What are you doing? Stop it." I screamed, "What are you doing? Stop it." My mother-in-law looked at me defiantly and said, "I'm punishing her because she won't listen. Look, she's quiet now." But as I looked down at Marigold, her little body seemed limp, her arms and legs dangling. She looked like she had lost consciousness. I quickly grabbed Marigold from her arms, panicking. "What the hell are you trying to do? Kill her? If anything happens to Marigold, I won't forgive you," I shouted. Without waiting for her response, I immediately called for an ambulance. As the medics arrived and we rushed Marigold to the hospital, my mother-in-law finally seemed to realize how serious this was. She followed us in silence, but as we arrived, I overheard her talking to the nurse. "She fell out of the crib," she said. "Please help her." I was shocked. "Why are you lying? You hit her." I protested, but I knew this wasn't the time to argue. After what felt like an eternity, the doctor came out with an update. "Your daughter has shaken baby syndrome. She vomited and had a seizure afterward, which confirms it. Will she be okay? Has she regained consciousness?" I asked, terrified. The doctor nodded reassuringly. "Her brain activity looks normal, and she's in a restful sleep right now. If she continues to improve, you should be able to take her home today. But just to clarify," he added, "you mentioned that she fell out of the crib?" "What?" I replied, shocked. "No, my mother-in-law hit her." The doctor's expression became serious. Shaken baby syndrome doesn't occur from simply falling out of a crib. It only happens when a baby's head is violently shaken or struck hard. My mother-in-law, suddenly defensive, tried to protest. "I did no such thing. She must have misunderstood." The doctor cut her off, his voice firm. "Shaken baby syndrome is not something to take lightly. You were very fortunate that this case was mild. In severe instances, it can lead to brain bleeding, vision impairment, and even death. Hitting or shaking a baby for any reason is unacceptable." She fell silent, realizing she couldn't talk her way out of this. But before I could say more, I was led to a small room, where I waited for what felt like hours. Eventually, 2 police officers arrived. They explained that this was considered an assault. I told them, "I didn't do anything. My mother-in-law is the one who hit my daughter." "We'll need to hear the full story at the station," one officer said. "Would you come with us?" I agreed, trying to stay calm. I asked the nurses to keep an eye on Marigold, and then went with the police. At the station, I explained everything that happened in detail, from the moment my mother-in-law had started interfering with Marigold's care to the terrifying incident that morning. "All right," the officer said finally. "You can go home for now. We'll need to interview your daughter's grandmother, so please let her know we'll be contacting her." "I understand," I replied, feeling a mix of relief and worry. I thanked them, then rushed back to the hospital, desperate to check on Marigold. When I arrived, I found the doctor. "Excuse me, where's my daughter?" asked, looking around anxiously. The doctor frowned and said, "Your daughter was already taken home by her grandmother." "What?" I felt my heart drop. "You're kidding, right?" I hurried home, realizing along the way that I hadn't even told Soren. I called him, trying to explain, but he interrupted, his voice full of anger. "What did you do? I heard you hit Marigold."
How could you?
"What kind of mother does that?" "Wait, Soren. Please just let me explain," I said, my voice trembling. "Save it," he replied coldly. "I'm coming home." As I stood in the entryway, panic rising, I saw Soren waiting with a stern, almost accusing look. "You've got some nerve coming back here, looking so unperturbed," he snapped. "How can you face Marigold?" "Wait," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's been a misunderstanding. I didn't do anything." "Enough with the lies," he retorted, dismissing my words. "My mother told me everything. You were taken in by the police, weren't you? That's because of your mother's lies. She's twisting the whole situation to blame me, I said, desperate for him to understand. But Soren's expression remained hardened. Then, from inside the house, I heard my mother-in-law's voice, cold and unwavering. There's no place for you here anymore. I clenched my fists, determined to reveal the truth. You might not believe anything I say right now, but the truth will come to light soon enough. Can I stay here until then? I asked, holding onto a shred of hope. Soren paused, a bit taken aback. What do you mean? The police will be coming by later. Let's clarify everything while they're here, I replied. At that moment, my mother-in-law hurriedly interjected, I think I'd better go home for today, and moved toward the door. Desperate to prevent her escape, I blocked her way. Just then, the doorbell rang, and the officers arrived. With everyone seated around the table, one of the officers spoke. We've heard the story from Marigold's mother, but it doesn't match what the grandmother told us. We'd like to hear her version of today's events once more. My mother-in-law launched into a shaky retelling, claiming that I had hit Marigold on the head, causing her collapse. But as she continued, her story became increasingly tangled and incoherent. She stammered, unable to answer the officer's questions, and finally broke down in tears. The officer's stern voice cut through the silence. Just to confirm, the one who harmed Marigold was not the mother, but the grandmother. Is that correct? My mother-in-law, unable to hold up her lies any longer, gave a defeated nod. With that, the suspicion against me was completely cleared. I looked at her, my voice steady. If you try to make this worse, I'll sue you for assault. She dropped to her knees, clinging to me, begging desperately. Anything but that, please. Resolutely, I shook off her pleading hands, and the officers led her away, her head hanging in shame. Soren, clearly shaken, tried to defend himself. Mom did it? She promised to help, but instead she hurt Marigold. He looked at me, filled with remorse. The worst part is, you didn't even check the facts before accusing me, I said, my voice cold. Did you really think I was that terrible of a mother? He looked down, guilt evident. No, I just didn't think my mom would do something like that. You thought I would, I replied, anger rising. Enough is enough. I've made my decision. I want a divorce. Hey, relax, he said, trying to calm me down. I refuse to get divorced. You're overreacting.
No, Soren.
I'm not overreacting. You doubted me and sided with your mother without a second thought. And as for you, you lack the commitment to be a husband or a father. Please gather your things and leave. I then made the decision to take legal action against my mother-in-law for assault. Though she only received a fine, I was able to secure enough child support and alimony from both of them to ensure Marigold and I would be taken care of. After severing ties with that toxic relationship, Marigold and I found peace. We've since moved on, creating a calm, stable life together, finally free from the turmoil they brought into our lives. I never thought my engagement would end before it began, but looking back, the signs were there from the very first moment Oliver got down on one knee. My name is Harper, and this is the story of how my perfect fairy tale turned into a revenge plot worthy of a soap opera. The proposal happened during what was supposed to be a casual family dinner at the Hayes Mansion. I should have known something was up when Victoria, Oliver's mother, insisted I wear the pearl necklace she'd thoughtfully sent over that morning. It felt like a collar, but I put it on anyway. Darling, you've positioned your salad fork incorrectly again, Victoria said, her smile never reaching her eyes. But we can't expect everyone to understand proper etiquette immediately, can we? I shifted the fork while Dad squeezed my knee under the table. He'd taken off work early from the auto shop to be here, and I could still see traces of grease under his fingernails despite his best efforts to clean up. That's when Oliver stood up, champagne glass in hand. I have an announcement to make. His voice trembled slightly, something I'd never heard before. Harper Quinn, you've brought so much joy into my life. My heart stopped. This wasn't happening. Not here. Not with Victoria's eyes boring into me like laser beams. Will you marry me? The ring he pulled out was massive, exactly the kind Victoria would have picked. I looked at Oliver's hopeful face, then at my dad's proud smile, then at Ethan, my brother, who was watching Victoria instead of us. Yes, I whispered, because what else could I say? The word felt both right and wrong in my mouth. Victoria clapped perfectly manicured hands. Welcome to the family, dear. We'll have so much work to do to prepare you for your role as a Hayes. Mother, Oliver warned, but she continued. The annual charity gala is in 3 months. We'll need to work on your presentation before then. Perhaps we can discuss some minor improvements over tea tomorrow. I felt my dad stiffen beside me. Ethan's fork clattered against his plate. But it was the way Oliver remained silent, studying his champagne instead of defending me, that made my stomach turn. As everyone raised their glasses to toast, I caught Victoria's reflection in the crystal chandelier above us. She wasn't looking at her son or at me. She was staring at my father's weathered hands, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. That's when I knew this wasn't just going to be a wedding. It was going to be a war. The first crack appeared 3 days after the engagement, during what Victoria called my refinement session. I sat in her pristine sunroom, surrounded by wedding magazines and china patterns, while she circled me like a shark sizing up its prey. Your posture, dear. A Hayes woman never slouches. She tapped my shoulder with a rolled-up magazine. And we simply must do something about your wardrobe. That advertising agency look won't do for our social circle. I straightened my back, feeling the ache from maintaining what Victoria deemed proper posture for the past 2 hours. The diamond ring felt heavy on my finger, like it was weighing me down rather than lifting me up. Actually, I was thinking of a small ceremony, I ventured. Maybe in Dad's backyard? The apple trees will be blooming in spring. Victoria's laugh cut through the air like glass breaking. Oh, darling. Oliver is a Hayes. The governor will be attending. We can't possibly have our guests standing in a backyard. My phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. Need rescue? I'm outside. Before I could respond, Oliver walked in. Mother, Harper. How's the planning going? I waited for him to kiss me hello. He didn't. Wonderful. Victoria beamed. Harper's being so cooperative. Though we need to discuss the guest list. I noticed several names from her side that might not blend well with our usual crowd. I watched Oliver's face, waiting for him to say something, anything. He adjusted his tie. Whatever you think is best, Mother. Oliver, I started, but Victoria cut in. Oh! Before I forget, the country club called. They're holding the Thompson girls' wedding shower the same day as ours. Such a shame. All those board members' wives will be there instead of at yours. She sighed dramatically. If only you'd let me book it last year when I suggested. The implication hung in the air. If only Oliver had been engaged to someone more suitable back then. My phone buzzed again. This time, I stood up. I should go. Ethan's waiting. Your brother. Victoria's eyebrows arched. The one who just started at that tech startup? How innovative of him. I grabbed my bag, catching my reflection in Victoria's spotless windows. For a moment, I barely recognized myself in the pressed blazer and pearl necklace that still felt like a collar. Harper, wait. Oliver called as I reached the door. But it was Victoria who followed me out. Just remember, dear, she whispered, straightening my necklace with cold fingers. A Hayes woman never runs away from a challenge. And you do want to be a Hayes woman, don't you? I left without answering, but as I slid into Ethan's car, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just lost something important, and it wasn't just my dignity. You okay? Ethan asked, studying my face. I'm fine, I lied, watching the Hayes mansion shrink in the rearview mirror. Everything's fine. But we both knew it wasn't. The Hayes annual charity gala felt like walking into a beautifully decorated trap. I smoothed down the designer dress Victoria had insisted on buying me, another item on the growing list of things I owed the Hayes family. Harper, darling. Margaret Whitmore, one of Victoria's closest friends, air-kissed my cheeks. Such a surprise to see you here. We all thought Oliver would bring Charlotte Pierce tonight. They were practically engaged last summer, weren't they? The champagne flute nearly slipped from my hand. I'm sorry, what? Oh! Margaret's eyes widened with fake concern. You didn't know? Charlotte's family has been friends with the Hayes for generations. Such a shame about their timing. She was in Europe when Oliver met you. I scanned the room for Oliver, finding him deep in conversation with his mother and a stunning blonde who kept touching his arm. The blonde caught my eye and smiled, the kind of smile that held secrets. "That's her, isn't it?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Charlotte just returned last week," Margaret continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Victoria must be thrilled. She spent years planning their match." My phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. "Need intel on someone named Charlotte Pierce?" I excused myself, heading for the powder room, but voices from Victoria's private study made me pause. "Be reasonable, Oliver," Victoria's voice carried through the crack in the door. "Charlotte's father sits on the board. This merger could secure your future at the firm." "Mother, I'm engaged to Harper. An engagement can be broken." God knows this wouldn't be the first time a Hayes man had to make a practical choice over an emotional one. Silence. The kind that screams louder than words. "Just think about it," Victoria continued. "Charlotte understands our world. Harper, well, she's trying, bless her heart." I backed away, bumping into someone. "You must be Harper." The blonde, Charlotte, steadied me with manicured hands. "Victoria's told me so much about you. That dress is lovely. Last season's collection, isn't it?" Before I could respond, Oliver appeared. "Charlotte, I see you've met my fiancé." "Yes, we were just discussing fashion." She laughed, touching Oliver's arm again. "Remember that boutique in Paris where we—" I watched Oliver's face soften at the memory, a memory that didn't include me. In that moment, I saw what everyone else at this party saw, an outsider wearing borrowed clothes, playing at belonging. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my dad. "Just checking in, kiddo. You still coming for Sunday dinner?" I looked at the message, then at Oliver and Charlotte laughing about shared memories, then at Victoria watching it all with satisfied eyes. Something inside me shifted. Maybe it was time to stop playing defense and start playing to win. Wedding planning with Victoria had become psychological warfare, but today's battle hit differently. I sat in her pristine home office, watching her shred my carefully selected invitation samples without even looking at them. "These simply won't do," she said, dropping the pieces into her crystal waste bin. "I've already ordered the proper invitations. Crane and Company, of course. The same design we used for Charlotte's debutante ball." My phone lit up with a text from Oliver. "Can't make lunch. Emergency at work." The third canceled lunch this week. Each time, someone had spotted him at restaurants with Charlotte, discussing business. Speaking of Charlotte, Victoria continued, "She's offered to help with the seating arrangements. She knows everyone who matters. I can handle the seating." "Oh, darling." Victoria's laugh could freeze hell. "You don't even know half the guests. Most are Oliver's connections. Speaking of which," she slid a piece of paper across her desk. "We need to discuss removing some names from your list." I scanned the document. "You want to uninvite my father's siblings? Your uncle is a plumber, dear. And your aunt." She wrinkled her nose. "Well, we can't have someone who runs a food truck mingling with the senator's wife, can we?" My phone buzzed again. This time, it was Ethan. "Found something you need to see." "Now, your brother, however," Victoria continued, "can stay on the list. His company's recent success makes him acceptable, though he'll need coaching on proper dinner conversation." I stood up, my chair scraping against her imported marble floors. "I need to go." "Harper." Victoria's voice stopped me at the door. "Oliver's future depends on this wedding being perfect. You do want what's best for him, don't you?" 20 minutes later, I met Ethan at his office. Without a word, he handed me his tablet. There on the screen was a legal document, a prenuptial agreement I'd never seen, already containing what looked like my forged signature. The terms were brutal. I would get nothing in a divorce, would have to repay all improvement expenses Victoria had spent on me, and would have to sign a non-disclosure agreement about the Hayes family. "Where did you find this?" "It was in the system at Oliver's firm," Ethan said quietly. "Dated 3 days ago." My hands shook as I read the final clause. if I broke the engagement. I would owe the Hayes family compensation for emotional damages and social embarrassment. Harper, Ethan's voice was gentle. There's more. Check your email. I pulled out my phone to find photos of Oliver and Charlotte leaving a jewelry store yesterday, her left hand conspicuously hidden from view. The pieces clicked together like a twisted puzzle. I wasn't just fighting for my place in their world anymore, I was fighting to avoid becoming their cautionary tale. What are you going to do? Ethan asked. I thought of Victoria's smug smile, of Oliver's silence, of Charlotte's calculated touches. I'm going to give them exactly what they deserve. The final straw wasn't dramatic. It wasn't Victoria's latest criticism or Charlotte's perfectly timed appearances. It was Oliver's silence during our wedding venue walkthrough, as his mother systematically dismantled every dream I'd ever had about my wedding day. The garden ceremony simply won't work, Victoria declared, her heels clicking across the historic venue's stone pathway. Far too common. We'll use the grand ballroom instead. I watched a butterfly land on one of the roses I'd imagined would frame our vows. Oliver and I discussed having it outdoors. The garden is why we chose this place. Oliver understands tradition. Victoria smiled, patting her son's arm. Don't you, darling? Oliver checked his phone, avoiding my eyes. Whatever works best, mother. My engagement ring caught the sunlight, throwing sparkles that suddenly felt like warning signals. The garden was my mother's favorite place, I said quietly, before she died. Yes, yes, Victoria waved her hand dismissively. But we must consider the living, dear. Charlotte mentioned it might rain that day anyway. I froze. Charlotte? Why would Charlotte know our wedding date? The silence that followed was deafening. Oliver suddenly found his shoelaces fascinating. Oh, Victoria's surprise was too perfect, too rehearsed. Didn't Oliver tell you? Charlotte's been helping with the backup plans. Her weather app is never wrong. My phone buzzed, another message from Ethan about the prenup he'd discovered. I ignored it, focusing instead on the way Oliver's hand twitched toward his pocket, where I knew he kept his second phone. Actually, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice was, I'd like to see these backup plans. Victoria's smile flickered. Perhaps we should discuss the menu instead. No. The word came out sharp enough to make both Hayes jump. I want to see everything Charlotte's been helping with. Oliver finally looked at me, panic flashing across his face. Harper, it's not what you think. Then what is it? I stepped closer, watching him retreat. Because I think your ex-girlfriend is planning our wedding while you're planning something else entirely with her. That's enough. Victoria snapped. Oliver, control your fiancé's hysteria before someone hears. Hysteria? I laughed, the sound echoing off the venue's stone walls. Is that what you call it when someone finally sees through your act? I turned to Oliver, really looking at him for the first time in weeks. You know what's funny? I kept waiting for you to choose me, to stand up for me. But you already made your choice, didn't you? Probably the same day you let your mother forge my signature on that prenup. The color drained from his face. How did you? Doesn't matter. I twisted the ring off my finger, feeling lighter with each turn. What matters is I'm finally making my choice. I dropped the ring at Victoria's feet, where it landed with a satisfying ping against the stone. Consider this my backup plan. 3 weeks after I dropped the ring, Victoria launched her counterattack. I was at work when the email hit everyone's inbox, board members, clients, even the cleaning staff. Photos of me from college, carefully selected to look far worse than they were. Along with anonymous claims about my unstable behavior and gold-digging tactics. By lunch, my boss had called me into his office. We value discretion here, Harper, he said, not meeting my eyes. Perhaps some time off would be beneficial. I walked out with my personal items in a cardboard box, my phone buzzing with messages from unknown numbers. Victoria had made sure the email went viral in her social circle. Don't worry, Ethan said when I showed up at his apartment. We've got enough evidence about the forged prenup too. They're claiming I knew about it. I cut him off. That I agreed to it during a dinner party. They have witnesses, Ethan. All those people who watched me try to fit into their world? They're all backing Victoria's story. My phone lit up with a text from Oliver. Mother's willing to make this go away if you sign the NDA. Please, Harper. For both our sakes. Another message followed, from Charlotte. You should have known your place. I threw my phone across the room, watching it crack against Ethan's expensive art piece, the one he'd bought to celebrate his startup's success. Now his investors were getting nervous too, thanks to his connection to the Quinn scandal. Dad called, Ethan said quietly. The auto shop's losing customers. Someone's been spreading rumors about him overcharging the Hayes family for years. The weight of it all hit me at once. Victoria wasn't just trying to hurt me, she was systematically destroying everything and everyone I loved. My phone rang again, an unknown number. When I answered, Victoria's voice was silk smooth. I warned you about challenging a Hayes, dear. Did you really think you could walk away without consequences? Sign the papers, admit publicly that you manipulated Oliver, and this ends. And if I don't? Then I hope your father has a backup plan for retirement. And Ethan, such a shame about those investors pulling out. All because his sister couldn't accept her limitations. After she hung up, I stood at Ethan's window, watching the city lights blur through my tears. Everything I'd worked for, everything my family had built, Victoria was burning it all down with a smile. Harper, Ethan's voice was gentle. Whatever you're thinking. I'm thinking it's time to stop playing defense. I wiped my eyes, something cold and determined settling in my chest. If Victoria wants to destroy everything I love, maybe it's time I return the favor. How? I turned to face him, feeling nothing but ice in my veins. By giving her exactly what she fears most, a real scandal. The Hayes annual charity gala became my battleground. I walked in wearing the same dress from my first disastrous evening there, but this time, I wasn't trying to fit in. I was there to burn it all down. Victoria spotted me first, her champagne glass freezing halfway to her lips. Security, she hissed, but I was already moving through the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, I called out, my voice carrying across the marble floor. I believe I owe you all an apology. The room hushed. Oliver appeared at the edge of the crowd, Charlotte clinging to his arm. Perfect. You see, I've been terribly dishonest, I continued, watching Victoria's face pale. I did sign that prenup. I signed lots of things, actually. Like the checks Victoria wrote to cover up Oliver's gambling debts. Or the documents hiding Hayes Industries' creative accounting from the IRS. Victoria lunged forward. She's lying. Am I? I pulled out my phone. Ethan's quite good with computers. Amazing what you can find in private servers. Would anyone like to see? That's enough. A new voice cut through the tension. Richard Hayes, Oliver's father, emerged from his study. Victoria, my office. Now. Richard, she's obviously. Now. His voice could have frozen fire. And Oliver? Bring Charlotte. We need to discuss her role in all this. As Victoria passed me, her perfect mask cracked. You have no idea what you've done. Actually, Richard said, she's done exactly what I hoped she would. The room went silent again. Richard turned to me, his eyes tired but kind. I've spent 20 years watching Victoria destroy people to protect our family's image. When Oliver brought you home, I saw someone strong enough to finally break the cycle. Dad? Oliver's voice cracked. Your mother needs help, son. Professional help. I've enabled her behavior too long, and it's hurt too many people. He looked at me. I'm sorry, Harper. For all of it. Victoria's carefully constructed world crumbled in real time. Her social circle backed away, phones already buzzing with new gossip. Charlotte disappeared into the crowd. Oliver just stood there, looking lost. The documents, Victoria whispered. You'll destroy your own family. No, I said quietly. I already sent everything to Richard last week. What happens next is his choice. I turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Victoria? My father's auto shop just got a very generous contract from Hayes Industries. Funny how things work out. As I walked away, I heard Richard say, Victoria, it's time we discuss divorce. I stepped into the cool night air where Ethan waited with our father. You okay? Dad asked, pulling me into a hug that smelled of motor oil and home. Yeah, I said, watching the Hayes Mansion's lights flicker behind us. I think I finally am. 6 months after the gala, I found myself sitting in a small cafe in Barcelona, watching tourists stream past the window. Ethan had insisted I use his startup bonus to travel, claiming I'd earned a victory lap around Europe. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Hayes Industries announces new CEO following Richard Hayes' retirement. The photo showed Oliver in a suit, looking more like his father than his mother. The article mentioned his recent community outreach initiatives and therapy advocacy programs. I closed the alert just as a familiar figure slid into the seat across from me. Victoria Hayes looked different, older without her perfect makeup, but somehow more real. "You're a hard woman to find," she said, placing an envelope on the table. That was the point of leaving. She nodded, fingers tracing the envelope's edge. "I'm in treatment now. Part of the divorce settlement. It's helping." She pushed the envelope toward me. "This isn't an apology. I don't think we're there yet. But it is an explanation." Inside was a worn photo of a young Victoria in a waitress uniform, standing outside a diner. She looked happy, unguarded. "I was that girl once," she said quietly, "before I married into the Hayes family and let their expectations become my prison. Then I became the warden." "Why are you here?" "To tell you you're right to break free. And to thank you for breaking the cycle." She stood, straightening her non-designer jacket. "Oliver's different now. Better. Sometimes destroying something broken makes room for something stronger to grow." She left before I could respond, disappearing into the crowd like a ghost of my past. That evening, I sat on my hotel balcony, writing postcards to Dad and Ethan. A message popped up from Mia with a photo of Dad's auto shop, now expanded thanks to the Hayes contract. Another from Ethan showed his startup's latest success. "Mind if I join you?" Ryan stood in the doorway, his daughter Sophie peeking around his legs. We'd met 3 weeks ago when he helped me with directions, and somehow kept running into each other since. "Sophie wants to know if you'll tell her another story," he said, smiling that warm smile that never asked me to be anything but myself. I looked at Victoria's photo one last time before tucking it away. "Actually, I have a pretty good one about a girl who thought she wanted a fairy tale, but found something better instead." "How does it end?" Sophie asked, climbing into my lap. I watched the Barcelona sunset paint the sky in colors no Hayes mansion could match, feeling the weight of my past finally lift. "It ends with her writing her own story," I said, hugging Sophie close. "And this time, she gets to choose every word."